Chapter 317. Gong Yimo glanced at the person who brought her in. She found a place to hide first and continued eavesdropping. Jin Sheng looked like he was about to explode. He held the whip in his hand and pointed it at the weeping Yun Jin. Although his face was pale and he looked very weak, the strength he used to whip her was not weak at all. He did not look like a patient who had been lying in bed for a long time. Yun Jin was really wronged. Your Majesty, this concubine really doesn't know that person. Smack. Jin Sheng whipped her again. At this moment, a woman dressed in court attire beside him held his hand and said, "Your Majesty, you have just recovered from a serious illness. It's better not to get angry." Jin Sheng glanced at her when he heard this. The Empress is still the most reasonable one. When his gaze landed on Yun Jin, it was filled with deep hatred. After all, he was not a fool. Kim Yoon now had too much influence in Yuheng. If he wanted to make a comeback, he had to take advantage of Kim Yoon's absence and pin the crime of having an illegitimate father on him. Only then would he have a chance to retaliate. So he had been pretending to be sick all this time. Finally, this day had come. As he thought about it, he coldly pointed at the woman he once loved on the ground and said, "Men, this bitch is causing trouble in the palace. Bestow her with poisoned wine." Without waiting for Yun Jin to say anything, he laughed and said, "When that bastard comes back, we will teach him a lesson." On the other side, the people from Daiyu State had been waiting outside the city for a long time. When they saw that Gong Yimo did not come out, they left 10 people to guard here. The rest continued on their way according to Gong Yimo's instructions and waited for her to finish her business before coming back to look for them. When the little princess saw this scene, she had a plan. She took out a bag of medicine and steeled her heart. She poured it into the teapot in the carriage and drank it herself. It was just a normal poison that would only make one's limbs weak. There shouldn't be any problems. On Gong Yimo's side, seeing that the emperor was going to sentence Yun Jin to death, she couldn't take it anymore. She said to the person who brought her in, "How many people did Kim Yoon leave behind?" That person nodded. "Half of the imperial guards around here are your highness men." But what? Gong Yimo frowned and asked. "It's just that many people in the palace have switched sides. Half of the imperial guards around the imperial consort are on the emperor's side, but the rest are all on the emperor's side. Once a fight breaks out, they can only wait to be captured." It seemed that he had also thought about rebelling. Well, Yun Jin was about to be killed. If he didn't rebel, was he going to wait for death? This matter cannot be delayed. Once the emperor kills the imperial concubine and spreads the news that the imperial concubine committed suicide for fear of punishment, Kim Yoon is really a vile spawn, then he will be in a very passive position when he return. Gong Yimo's brain spun quickly and he finally made a prompt decision. "Go out and save them now. I'll be back in a jiffy." That person definitely wouldn't believe it. He thought that Gong Yimo would take the opportunity to escape. Moreover, without Gong Yimo around, he didn't have the guts to start a rebellion. "With only half of the imperial concubine's men here? Your Highness trusts me so much, but you don't. Let go." Her gaze turned cold and she subconsciously let go of the imperial concubine's hand. Seeing Gong Yimo quickly disappear behind the wall, he was a little hesitant. He really couldn't get used to Gong Yimo's fast pace. Who didn't think over and over again before finally making a difficult decision when they wanted to rebel? Unlike her, who made a decision after meeting face to face. However, when he heard Imperial concubine Yoon's miserable scream from inside, his face darkened. Should he do it or not? Do it. The poisoned wine was already prepared. Jin Sheng pinched Yun Jin's chin and wanted her to drink it. However, he didn't expect that Yun Jin actually spilled the poisoned wine when she struggled. This made Jin Sheng angry out of humiliation. "Slut. You refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit." Now, whenever he looked at Yun Jin, he would get angry. He actually didn't want her to die so easily. He rolled his eyes and thought of a vicious idea. "Guards. Here." More than 10 imperial guards walked out from behind him. "This slut is naturally promiscuous. Since she doesn't want to die properly, I'll give her to you. You can play with her however you want in front of me." His words made Yun Jin widen her eyes in disbelief. This The imperial guards hesitated and looked at each other. However, Jin Sheng shouted loudly, "Why aren't you doing it? I want to watch you play with her." The imperial guards didn't dare to disobey and surrounded Yun Jin. Soon, her clothes were torn apart, revealing her snow-white skin. "Your Majesty! Your Majesty, I beg you. Don't be like this. I beg you." At this moment, Yun Jin was crying without any sense of beauty. There was only fear. She crawled over and hugged Jin Sheng's leg, ignoring the fact that her dress was being torn apart behind her. Jin Sheng looked at her coldly. This woman had almost ruined him. Fortunately, he had seized the opportunity to counterattack. Otherwise, he would have been killed by Kim Yoon sooner or later. With that thought, he kicked Yun Jin away. Someone pulled Yun Jin's leg and dragged her back. More than 10 figures immediately surrounded her. At that moment, she felt despair. No. But at this moment, someone suddenly rushed in. "Bad news. Your Majesty, bad news." Jin Sheng and the Empress were shocked at the same time. "Did Kim Yoon come back early?" Jin Sheng asked fearfully. This was what they were most afraid of. The servant said, "No. No, the palace is on fire. Many places are burning. It can't be put out." Gong Yimo looked at the loft in front of her and poured oil mercilessly. This oil was the oil that Kim Yoon had brought back a year ago. This was because they had opened many mines in Yuheng back then. Although the progress was slow, they still had some gains. And this oil was the first batch of samples that were extracted. Each sample tank represented a different refining process. There were more than 10 tanks. Winter was dry. She set the fire down and it quickly burned. The raging flames burned in her eyes. At this moment, she stood on the roof and looked down at the palace servants who were scattered in fear. She revealed a cold smile. After setting fire to one place, she didn't delay and immediately ran to the next place. At her speed, half of the entire Yuheng palace would be burned down by her. At first, Jin Sheng didn't think much of it. But when he arrived at the courtyard and saw the thick smoke rising from the palace, he quickly shouted in fright, "What are you waiting for? Everyone, go put out the fire." As for himself, he angrily ran back and chased the others away. He kicked the half-naked Yun Jin a few times with great force and finally grabbed her long hair and lifted her up. His expression was ferocious. "Bit, what are you doing? Are you trying to destroy the foundation left by Yuheng's ancestors?" At this moment, Yun Jin couldn't hear what he was saying. But at the same time, the sound of fighting came from the courtyard. Jin Sheng suddenly felt that something was wrong. He stood up and looked outside. He saw the imperial guards who were guarding the palace suddenly rushing in. The gleaming machete was heading straight for him. Someone was rebelling. Chapter 318. Yuheng was besieged on all sides, and the outside of the city was also in a mess. The little princess was powerless as she was dragged away. She did not have the ability to resist at all. She never expected that she was only pretending to be sick and sneaking away when no one was paying attention. She wanted to return to Lu Yi alone. However, when she finally succeeded, a few men in black covered her mouth and took her away. She did not have time to take the antidote, so when she was taken away, she did not even have the strength to struggle or scream. The little princess had disappeared. This was something that no one had expected. The people of Dai Yu State thought that Lu Yi's people would take care of her, so as long as they did not cause trouble, they would turn a blind eye. And Lu Yi's people did not expect that their little princess, who had been doted on since she was young, would run away. She did not know martial arts, and she did not even have money on her. How could she survive without them? They searched outside the city for a long time, but they could not find the little princess. Both sides were very anxious. One side felt that they could not answer to Gong Yimo, and the other side felt that they could not answer to King Lu Yi, but they also felt that it was strange. With the little princess's ability, she could not have left so quietly, unless someone helped her. No, perhaps she had been kidnapped. They were in a mess, but Yuheng's palace was even more chaotic. The entire palace's inner courtyard was filled with smoke. Many commoners outside the palace looked up and saw the rising black smoke. They felt that something was wrong, Clamorous shouts and hurried footsteps could be heard everywhere. Suddenly, there was fire everywhere. They did not know which place to save. In such chaos, many of the more fragile people thought that the neighboring countries were coming to kill them. Everyone was in a state of panic. It was too noisy, so no one paid attention to what was happening in the imperial consort's chambers because there was no fire there. Black ashes fell from the sky as if it was snowing. The courtyard was littered with corpses. Many palace servants were curled up in a corner, shivering. The Empress and the Emperor were hiding in a corner of the room, and there were more than 10 people who were resisting stubbornly. Yoon Jin had been dragged to the side by a person who was wearing a coat. That person was the one who stopped Gong Yimo. He was also Yoon Jin's guest, Wang Jing. He looked ordinary and was not favored among the people around her, but he was the one who admired Yoon Jin the most. Jin Sheng was scared out of his wit. Who was it that wanted to rebel? Why didn't he have any warning beforehand? How could he have known? How could there have been any omen? It was all Gong Yimo's subconscious behavior. Seeing that none of the imperial guards outside came in to save the emperor, Jin Sheng felt that the situation was hopeless. Why was it that after scheming for so long and instigating so many people to defect, in the end, he was still defeated so easily? Who exactly did he lose to? The emperor's men fell one by one. At this moment, people outside finally heard the commotion and rushed over. More and more people came, desperately trying to squeeze into the courtyard. Yoon Jin's men quickly resisted, and the people who charged in were even more desperate. They knew very well that as long as they could capture the emperor before the emperor's men rushed in, it would be considered a victory. Why are they so slow? The imperial guards are about to charge in. This voice. Yoon Jin suddenly snapped out of her daze and looked out the door, only to hear a loud sound. A person flew into the room and hit the corner of the table, causing the 2 doors to collapse, revealing the scene outside. Jin Sheng's men had already charged in. At that moment, Jin Sheng's eyes shone with infinite vitality. Now was the time to compete in speed. It depended on whether the reinforcements would first destroy the imperial guards in the courtyard and then kill Yoon Jin, or whether Yoon Jin's men would capture the emperor first and use him as a hostage to command the world. At this critical moment, the few people who were stubbornly resisting saw that their men had already charged in and instantly became extremely strong. They actually managed to resist. Yoon Jin's men were not many to begin with, and now that the sounds of fighting and killing were getting closer and closer, their morale dropped and they retreated in defeat. A race of life and death was just a moment. But they would not forget that there was still Gong Yimo, this great killer weapon. They saw her use her sword to shake off all the people around her, and then like a hot knife through butter, she grabbed at the emperor. Finally, in the instant when Yoon Jin's men were almost all gone, her hand grabbed the emperor's neck, and she took a deep breath, lifted him up, and strode outside. At this moment, everyone put down their weapons. Her entrance was simply too domineering. Just now when she was killing in all directions, because there were too many people in the courtyard, they did not have the time to take care of her. But when she cleaned up the trouble and charged into the room like a sword to capture the emperor alive, they then realized how abnormal this person's martial skills were. She said that she would turn the tide. It was clearly a situation of certain death, but because of her appearance, there was a completely different change. This was what it meant to turn the tide. So when she carried Jin Sheng out of the room, everyone was truly speechless. They could not help but feel fear in their hearts. The emperor had painstakingly calculated the current situation, but not only had she messed it up, she had also caught it. To catch bandits, first catch the ringleader. Even if they were unwilling, they could only stop and not dare to move again. At this moment, the empress suddenly wanted to shout, "She is the princess of Daiyu State." If others knew that the princess of Daiyu State was participating in Yuheng's national affairs, and it was a major matter related to the throne. Let's see if Kim Yoon can successfully ascend the throne. Even if she died, she would not let Kim Yoon have an easy time. But unexpectedly, she had only said one word before her throat was sealed by a hairpin. In the end, when she died, her eyes were wide open. She did not know what had happened. The palace servants beside her were already scared enough. At this moment, their faces were inexplicably splattered with blood. One could imagine how terrified they were. They immediately covered their faces and screamed. "Ah! The Empress is dead." A stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. Everyone inside and outside the room was stunned. At this moment, they did not dare to look at the woman standing in front of the door. Just now, the Empress had only screamed, and she pulled out the hairpin and threw it without looking back. It directly pierced the Empress's neck. She died with her eyes open. What more them? They had never seen anyone so bold. The Empress of a country was not a chicken. She killed without batting an eyelid. It was clear that she was extremely bold, determined, and cruel. But thinking about it, even the emperor of one of the 4 great countries was strangled by her. What more a mere empress? So when she stood in front of the door and swept her gaze across, everyone quieted down and did not dare to move. There were murmurs outside, and people kept trying to rush in. And now, the people inside just wanted to run out like crazy. Who was this woman? How could she be so terrifying? Chapter 319. Jin Sheng couldn't catch his breath. His legs kicked wildly, and only the tips of his feet touched the ground. Gong Yimo was also afraid of strangling him to death, so she loosened her grip. He fell to the ground and coughed violently. His eyes were wide open, but he didn't dare to move a single step. The emperor was right in front of him, but even so, there were so many imperial guards a few steps away, but none of them dared to come forward and watch him suffer coldly. At this moment, Yun Jin finally regained her senses. There was no other way. The impact of the scene just now was too great. She never thought that Gong Yimo would save her, and in such a way. The air was filled with the smell of burnt wood. The sky was gloomy, and black ashes fell like black snow. It looked like hell on earth. There was still a commotion outside, but Gong Yimo didn't care. She only glanced at the crowd disdainfully and said to Yun Jin, "Where are you going to hide? How long are you going to hide? Are you waiting for me to take care of your family matters?" Yun Jin woke up from her dream and walked out with Wang Jing's help. At this moment, she was a little timid, afraid to get close to Gong Yimo. This feeling was just like when she first met her. She was intimidated by her aura, and every time she got close to her, she didn't even dare to breathe loudly. She still had some brains. At this moment, she didn't dare to call out Gong Yimo's name, so she asked in a low voice, "What should we do now? What should we do?" Gong Yimo raised her eyebrows and looked at her. Now that it was a life and death situation, what else could they do? She smiled and whispered in Yun Jin's ear, "There's still a bottle of poisonous wine in the house, right?" This sentence actually scared Yun Jin so much that her face turned pale. Her body trembled like a sieve. She couldn't believe that Gong Yimo actually wanted her to kill the emperor. Those ministers wouldn't let her off. At this moment, Gong Yimo waved her hand. Yun Jin and the rest of the people strangely understood her meaning and sealed the door of the courtyard. At this moment, the people outside the courtyard seemed to have a bad premonition. They didn't want to rush in, so the heavy door was locked, separating the 2 worlds. This action caused the people in the courtyard to be terrified. What was he trying to do? Kill him to silence him? At this moment, they all began to regret rushing in so quickly. The action of closing the door also frightened Yun Jin. At this moment, in her eyes, Gong Yimo was like a devil. She even wanted to kill the emperor. It was too terrifying. However, Gong Yimo did not care whether she could accept it or not. She glanced at Wang Jing. "You, go and bring me the wine that His Majesty bestowed upon the imperial concubine." As soon as she said that, Jin Sheng couldn't care less about his discomfort. He looked around in a panic and sat on the ground, screaming at the top of his lungs. "You! Quickly save me. Cough cough, I confer upon you the title of National Protector Great Generals. Save me." At this time, Wang Jing came out with the wine. Hearing this, he glanced at Yun Jin, sighed, and said to the people present, Wang Jing, you all know me. We used to be brothers who trained together. Now, I'm no different from everyone else. It's just that I'm loyal to His Highness." He glanced at Jin Sheng on the ground and said, "The reason why I rebelled and sought refuge with His Highness was not because His Highness promised me a high position and a generous salary, but because My younger sister was valued by this dog of an emperor. He snatched her into the palace and within a year, she passed away. As he said this, a trace of sorrow appeared on his face. Jin Sheng had indeed done many bad things. When he mentioned it, everyone present could think of 7 or 8 things. Wang Jing took a deep breath and said loudly to the crowd, "Dog of an emperor, Jin Sheng. He's muddle-headed and tyrannical because he didn't rule strictly. When an of Silla was in power, how many unjust and tragic cases did he cause? Every time there was a natural disaster and the people were suffering unspeakably, what did he do? Either he let it happen and let it happen, leaving corpses everywhere. Even if there was relief food, it would become old rice in the hands of the people. This is the country under this dog of an emperor." Wang Jing spoke louder and louder. Moreover, no one refuted him. And since 3 years ago, when His Highness gradually took over the throne, what about His Highness? His Highness did everything himself, from building roads and digging waterways. In just 3 years, even if our Yuheng is not the wealthiest, we can still be ranked second, right? Moreover, His Highness is benevolent and respectful to the emperor. He isn't passionate about the throne, but what about this dog of an emperor? He's afraid that his position will be taken away. Yesterday, he even found someone to spread a rumor that he's the second prince's biological father. What a joke! For his own selfish interests and his own position, he would even harm his own son and kill his wife. Do you really want him to be the emperor of our Yuheng? Everyone was silent. No one spoke, but Gong Yimo interrupted at the right time. She twirled a strand of her hair around her finger and smiled faintly. This person. His life and death are in the hands of a single thought. Even the emperor is like this. What about you? This implied threat directly made everyone present kneel down. An inexplicable chill deeply pierced their brains, causing their backs to go numb. Gong Yimo glanced at them. Her gaze was like a sharp blade, making them feel as if they had been scraped by it. She took a step forward, and there seemed to be a substantial pressure on her body. When she stepped forward, everyone wanted to retreat. Those who are here today, if you follow my orders, you can walk out of the door behind you alive. If you don't, you can stay here forever. Make your choice. As soon as she finished speaking, everyone lowered their heads and kowtowed, trembling as they spoke. We will definitely keep our mouths shut. Please spare us from death. Seeing that everyone was kowtowing at Gong Yimo's feet, Jin Sheng was finally afraid. At the most critical moment, he suddenly thought of slandering Gong Yimo. When Gong Yimo changed her name to Shuyu, no one else had seen her, but the nobles in the palace had seen her twice. He wanted to tell the world that all of this was a conspiracy of the Dai Yu state. That unfilial son of his had long been brainwashed by that demoness of the Dai Yu state and wanted to commit treason. The fact that the princess of the Dai Yu state had repeatedly interfered in all of this was evidence. He wanted to tell the world. But before he could speak, Gong Yimo seemed to have sensed his thoughts. She directly reached out and lifted him up again. Then she pinched his chin with one hand, making him unable to speak. She glanced at Yun Jin from the corner of her eyes. What are you waiting for? Why aren't you serving the emperor? Yun Jin was so frightened that she didn't dare to move. That was the emperor, the son of the true dragon. Even if she dared to drug him, she would never dare to poison him to death. Jin Sheng glared at Gong Yimo with hatred. Before she came, his life was so carefree. She had ruined his plans time and time again. Last time, she had left Yuheng alive. So this time, she came back to take revenge. And he was going to die in the hands of a woman? Seeing that Yun Jin wasn't moving, Gong Yimo was a little impatient. I still have something to do. I'll count to 3. If you don't do it, I'll leave immediately. Her words inexplicably gave Jin Sheng a chance to live. Chapter 320. He glared fiercely at Yun Jin. He glared at this woman. She was most afraid of him showing such an expression. He wanted to stare fiercely at her. It was all her fault. It was all because he had favored her again that he was unlucky. She was also not a good person. As for Kim Yoon, although Kim Yoon was not bad, who knew if he was his son? Ha ha ha. The 3 of them were not good people. 1. Jin Sheng struggled to break free from Gong Yimo and threaten Yun Jin. 2. Gong Yimou did not look like she was faking it. Moreover, Jin Sheng was confident that once Gong Yimou left, he would definitely gain the upper hand again. When that time came, he would throw Yun Jin into the lowest grade military camp to be a military prostitute. He would let her suffer humiliation and die. 3. Wang Jing panicked. Your Highness, I'll do it. Yun Jin finally made up her mind. She was still afraid of death. Holding the wine flask, she walked step by step towards Gong Yimou. With every step she took, her heart trembled. She could not hold the wine flask steadily in her hand. Why didn't Gong Yimou directly kill the emperor? Why did she have to do it? Thinking of this, she could not help but glare at Gong Yimou with some resentment. Gong Yimou smiled. She did it on purpose. These people today were all witnesses. They had all witnessed that Kim Yoon had died in Yun Jin's hands. So in the future, even if Yun Jin wanted to find trouble with her, she would have to solve her own problems first. After all, she did not intend to kill these people. Moreover, there was no such thing as an impenetrable wall. All of this might have some effect on Kim Yoon, but the effect would not be great. However, Yun Jin was different. As a wife, poisoning her husband was a crime punishable by death. However, with Kim Yoon around, even if she did not die, she could only be put under house arrest in the palace. She would have to abstain from meat and pray to Buddha for the rest of her life. She had betrayed him, and he was giving her a little reward. Gong Yimou smiled, revealing her pearly white teeth. She was not a person who held grudges, but when she could take revenge, she would do it. How satisfying. With that thought in mind, Gong Yimou gave an order. Raise your heads. When she said that, everyone raised their heads and looked at this scene with their eyes wide open. The emperor was forced to drink poisoned wine by his own concubine. Just this alone was enough for Jin Sheng to go down in infamy for 10,000 years. Under everyone's gaze, Yun Jin couldn't bear to do it. Wang Jing couldn't bear it. He glanced at Gong Yimou and said in a low voice, Niang Niang, let this subject come down. I don't want to dirty your hands. That was exactly what Yun Jin wanted. She was about to hand the flagon to him, but Gong Yimou saw it and said coldly, Is there a difference? He's one of your people. If you think that you can use him as a shield when the truth is revealed, you'll be spared. Aren't you too naive? Unless Gong Yimou did it herself, she could push the blame to the Daiyu state and say that it was Daiyu state's conspiracy, or push the blame to the assassins. But why would Gong Yimou agree? She didn't have any evidence against her. Could it be that there was someone here who could prove her identity? Yun Jin also hoped that Gong Yimou would do it herself, but her expectant gaze was like throwing it to a blind person. In her anger, she mustered up her courage and aimed the mouth of the flagon at Jin Sheng's mouth and poured it in, and she was really ruthless. Her beautiful eyes were filled with anger as she poured the entire flagon down. When Gong Yimou released her hand, Jin Sheng vomited blood and died in a few seconds. It was clear how strong the poison was. Even as he died, he stared at Yun Jin with his eyes wide open. He was obviously unwilling. With a pa sound, the strange silence was broken. The flagon fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. Yun Jin leaned back and almost fainted. Fortunately, Wang Jing held her. At this time, Wang Jing looked at Gong Yimou with deep respect. Because of her, the Yuheng emperor and empress died in a day. And because of her, Yun Jin, who was about to be humiliated to death, survived. Kim Yoon's position was stabilized, and a disaster was resolved. Such a woman was only 17 years old. 17. His guts and intelligence were enough to turn an entire dynasty upside down in an instant, causing a storm with a flip of his hand. She was really too scary. The noise outside the walls gradually quieted down. The fire must have been extinguished, but the anxiety in the air didn't dissipate because the demon was still here. Gong Yimou shook her hand. Her hand was a little sore from exerting too much force just now. What happened today? Will you tell anyone? Her voice was low. Everyone quickly shook their heads subconsciously. Many of them even kowtowed and swore that they wouldn't tell anyone. At this time, Yun Jin was already muddle-headed and Wang Jing wasn't a person who could see things clearly. So at this moment, the Yuheng Imperial Palace actually allowed her to do whatever she wanted. You Go to the Jinsha department and get someone to record all the losses." The person who Gong Yimo pointed at was stunned and then ecstatic. He quickly went. The door opened a small crack. That was the door of hope. Seeing that someone left alive, many of them looked at Gong Yimo with anticipation, hoping that she would point at them. "You, go to Minglian Lane and get someone to record all the deaths. Those who escaped during the chaos, punish them severely." "Yes." Another person quickly responded and quickly got up and ran out. After staying in Yuheng for almost 3 years, Gong Yimo was quite familiar with this place. She quickly gave out orders one by one. That posture was as if he was pointing at the world and was in high spirits. She was even more confident than the Empress, and even more serious and calm than the Emperor. Yet, with just a few words from her, everyone went about their duties. If this continued, order would be restored to the Yuheng Imperial Palace after this chaos. At this moment, Wang Jing didn't know what to say. He sincerely felt that calling Gong Yimo was a wise choice. Fast, accurate, ruthless. Other than her, if he called anyone else, Yun Jin would have died long ago or been persecuted by a group of people. Therefore, he was very glad that he had targeted her from the beginning. Finally, Gong Yimo stretched. She saw the frightened Yun Jin crying in Wang Jing's arms, grabbing his clothes and crying like a little girl. She couldn't help but sigh and strode away. If she wanted to leave, no one dared to stop her, even if she caused the imperial palace to be filled with smoke, even if she expanded her power and stirred up the entire palace. She caused a dynasty to change in an instant, but when she left, she was still calm as if she didn't do anything. She was unbelievably confident. She was really in a hurry. Although she pretended to be calm on the surface, she was still feeling weak in her heart. She made a fool of Yun Jin and vented her anger. She also burned half of Yuheng Imperial Palace. How much money was that? Kim Yoon would definitely be furious when he came back. She'd better leave quickly. However, she didn't expect that when she rushed out of the city, there was a bigger trouble waiting for her. Chapter 321. By the time she rushed to the city gates, it was already 15 minutes later. The city was in chaos. Kim Yoon's subordinates saw the smoke rising from the imperial palace, and the people's hearts were unsettled. They quickly placed the entire city under martial law, so it took her a lot of effort to get out. Now, she could only wait to meet up with the others before continuing forward. But from afar, she saw a group of people waiting for her. She suddenly had a bad premonition. "Eldest princess, you're finally back," a lively young man from the Imperial Guards said bitterly. "Where did you go?" Gong Yimo scratched her head in embarrassment. She couldn't possibly say that she went to change the dynasty, right? What happened? She quickly got off her horse and asked. She glanced at Lu Yi's group and had an idea. The little princess is missing. Her premonition came true. Gong Yimo widened her eyes slightly. She doesn't know martial arts. How did she disappear? At this moment, the leader of the Imperial Guards, Sikong, stepped forward and said, "She seemed to have suddenly fallen ill. When we were about to stop and look for a doctor, Lu Yi suddenly ran over and said that the little princess was missing. We checked the traces and found that the little princess ran away from the back of the group. As for why we couldn't find her, perhaps someone helped her, or perhaps she was kidnapped." Gong Yimo frowned. This matter could be big or small. If the little princess died, then the enmity between Lu Yi and the Daiyu state would be set. And as the person involved in this matter, Lu Yi would definitely seek an explanation from her. However, the Crown Prince and Gong Dai were both on her side, so they would definitely reject Lu Yi's request. In this way, if things got serious, wouldn't they start a war? It was all her fault. She never thought that someone would intervene at this time. It was impossible for Yuheng to do it. They had not settled their own family matters yet, so it was impossible for them to come looking for trouble with her. It was also impossible for Yuheng to do it. Jin Sheng had been busy killing Yun Jin and framing Kim Yoon for the past 2 days. It was impossible for him to pay attention to her. Moreover, she had just killed 2 of Yuheng's most senior members. Then it could only be Daiyu State and Lu Yi. If it was the Daiyu State, it would definitely be Long Shengxiang's doing. As long as the little princess was killed, it would instantly create a storm and disrupt the situation of the Daiyu state's crown prince and King Qi's hegemony. If it was Lu Yi, it could only mean that someone didn't like the little princess and wanted to kill her with a borrowed knife. Gong Yimou's brain was spinning rapidly. No matter who it was, the only solution was to find Long Cheng's Ting Shui before they killed anyone. What a troublesome girl. Couldn't she be more peaceful? Why are you running? If she didn't run, the other party wouldn't dare to make a move against her with over 1,000 people on her side. They were really courting death. Gong Yimou's mind immediately displayed the topographic map of this area. She also called Lu Yi's men over. The situation was urgent and they couldn't care less. Everyone gathered together and Gong Yimou gave the orders. The few of you, bring 100 people over here. There's a small hill over there. There are many naturally formed karst caves in the hills that can hide people. Go take a look. Also, the other party probably has a lot of people. Be careful. The few imperial guards who were leading the group obeyed and brought 100 of Lu Yi's men in the direction that Gong Yimou pointed out. You, and you, bring 200 people over there. There's a forest over there and it's easy to hide. Go quickly. Yes. Gong Yimou then said to Buji, time is of the essence. After leaving 100 people behind, please bring the rest of the people over there. That direction is the commoners' area and the houses are densely packed. The other party might be hiding there. Be quick. Buji hurried over. He was surprised that Gong Yimou knew so clearly. There were 100 people left. Gong Yimou quickly thought of the nearby places where they could hide. There seemed to be none, as if her eyes suddenly lit up. There was a mine nearby but it belonged to Yuheng's country. She didn't think about it previously. But now that she thought about it, those people might really be daring enough to do such a thing. However, it was smart to do so. Because once the matter was exposed, not only would she be unable to escape responsibility, the person behind the scenes would also be able to frame Yuheng. It was really killing two birds with one stone. Gong Yimou rode over quickly, leaving 20 people behind to look after the luggage. The rest followed closely behind without any objections. When they arrived, they dismounted and followed Gong Yimou into a mountainous area on foot. The mountainous area was deserted and the Thunder River meandered through. After Gong Yimou dismounted, she looked at the ground and found that there were many traces of people entering and exiting here. Could it really be here? She looked at the 70 to 80 people she brought with her and was a little worried. She wasn't afraid of anything else. She was only afraid that when the fight started, the little princess would be killed and she wouldn't be able to stop it in time. After all, the mine was not like other places. It was too complicated. If only they could force them to come up. Long Cheng Ting Shui looked around with her eyes wide open. At this moment, her hands and feet were tied and her mouth was stuffed. She really couldn't cry for help. In the dark tunnel, a bearded man walked out. When he saw the little princess, his eyes were stunned for a moment. He came over and turned her face to look at her carefully. He even pulled out the rag in her mouth. Anyway, her limbs were weak and she was like a weak cat. Chakran, you dare to attack me? Imperial brother will kill you. She didn't expect this person to be an acquaintance. He was Lu Yi's prince. He was already in his 50s and he had married many young ladies. Chakran laughed. His voice was like a bell. He looked at Long Cheng Ting Shui and couldn't hide his desire. Bo Nana, you are the same as your brother and mother. Your heart is with the Han people. You even took a Han name. You didn't disgrace Lu Yi's name. But it doesn't matter now. You are going to die and your brother won't know that I did it. Long Cheng Ting Shui was naturally a smart girl. If she fell into their hands, she would definitely die. At this moment, she really hoped that Gong Yimou would appear and save her. At this time, another person appeared. He was thin and was clearly not on the same side as the tall Lu Yi. Don't talk nonsense. Kill her. Chakran was a little dissatisfied and said to that person, we are only temporarily cooperating. When can you order me around? I can do whatever I want. And now, I want to do her. His words scared Long Cheng Ting Shui so much that her face turned white. You are my uncle. Chakran unbuckled his belt and smiled obscenely. So what? Anyway, You are going to die. Why don't you give Uncle a good time? The other black-clothed man saw that he couldn't stop them and frowned impatiently. He then got up and walked out, leaving the cave to Long Cheng Ting Shui and Chakran. Before he left, he even said, "Remember to kill me after using me." He didn't show any mercy. Long Cheng Ting Shui immediately fell into despair. "No. Don't go." But she only shouted one sentence before she was slapped by Chakran. She covered her face. She was afraid, resentful, and most of all, regretful. Chapter 322. It would have been great if she hadn't run out. She didn't expect that someone had been watching her from the start. If she was still in the team, Gong Yimo would definitely protect her, but it was too late for regrets now. The other party's burly and ugly body was already pressing down on her. She didn't even have the strength to resist. At that moment, her eyes were filled with hatred. It was all Gong Yimo's fault. If she hadn't left, she wouldn't have wanted to take the opportunity to escape. If she had discovered that she was missing earlier and found her faster, she wouldn't be here being humiliated by this disgusting man. At this moment, she was flipped over and her hands and feet were tied. Her clothes were torn and she was about to be violated from behind. She was crying blood in her heart. She wished that the person being humiliated here was Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo was leading people to sneak into the ground. Her movements were very careful. Some of the people following her had been sent out by her to call for reinforcements. Most of them were sent out by her to do something else. So at this moment, she only brought a few people and sneaked in. The people in this mine must have been killed by the other party. But they would never have thought that because this was the first mine she left behind in Yuheng, she was more familiar with the layout of the mine than anyone else. So she bypassed the guards in front and sneaked in silently. At this moment, she was very anxious. No matter what Long Cheng Ting Shui's character was, she definitely couldn't die in her hands on this road. Finally, she heard a trace of sound. "It's here." Gong Yimo gave a look to the people behind her and told them to do what she had instructed. Then, she walked alone in the direction of the sound. She didn't expect that there would be so many people gathered there. When Gong Yimo appeared, everyone unsheathed their weapons. She glanced over and realized that there were more than 200 people. She was stunned. There were so many guards in front, but there were still so many people here. The people hiding here were also stunned. Even if Gong Yimo was standing there alone, they felt that she was heavier than 1,000 pounds. There was no other way. As a citizen of Daiyu State, Gong Yimo's talents were like thunder to their ears. Moreover, she could sneak in without anyone noticing. "Put down your weapons, I want to see your leader." Gong Yimo was the only one who could be so arrogant in a situation where she was outnumbered. Moreover, she didn't need anyone to announce her arrival. Her voice traveled very far in the cave. Not long after, a man in black stood out from behind the group of people who were eyeing her covetously. "It's you." Gong Yimo felt that it was really too easy to guess. It was actually Long Xiangxiang's people, because the person who came was actually Li Ku. After not seeing him for a long time, Li Ku had become even thinner. His entire person was like a bamboo pole, and he no longer had the elegant demeanor of the past. He looked at his men with a gloomy expression, then looked at Gong Yimo who was all alone. He mocked, "Are you here to save someone? You alone?" He was not afraid that Gong Yimo would call for reinforcements. He had already explored this place. This mine was connected in all directions. He would be able to get out no matter what. Gong Yimo smiled. "I'm here to negotiate with you, Brother Li." The two words Brother Li made Li Ku tremble. However, he did not forget what he was here to do, so his expression became even scarier as he said, "Don't give me that. We have nothing to talk about. You're just one person, what right do you have to negotiate with me?" Gong Yimo smiled. "Originally, I didn't have the right. After all, you still have hostages in your hands." However, she took out a small bamboo tube. "Do you recognize this?" Li Ku's pupils shrank. Oh no, he actually forgot that Gong Yimo had such a powerful thing in her hands. However, he was sure that Gong Yimo would not dare to do so. He sneered. "Don't use this thing to scare me. Once you blow this place up, you won't be able to escape either." I don't believe that you're willing to die here with me. Gong Yimo did not expect him to be so quick-witted. She smiled again. Do you know where the others who followed me went? Hearing her words, everyone quieted down. You guys are unlucky to have chosen the mine by the Thunder River. I built this mine single-handedly. In order to prevent fire and other problems, I specially set up a secret passage. As long as someone opens the sluice gate, the water from the Thunder River will rush in. The bomb in my hand is a signal. Believe it or not, I will definitely escape before the cave collapses, just like how I can silently walk here. Her words finally made Li Ku hesitate. He really wanted to catch the little princess, but it did not mean that he was willing to pay with his life. Now, both sides seemed to be at a strange equilibrium. Everyone had a trump card in their hands, so they were not willing to take a step back. Gong Yimo heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, they did not understand the situation and blindly believed in her. Otherwise, she really did not know how to stall for time. At this moment, everyone quieted down. Some subtle sounds became more obvious. That was Long Cheng's Ting Shui's voice. Gong Yimo's expression changed slightly. What did you guys do to her? At this moment, Li Ku seemed to have a trace of pleasure. She turned her body sideways and pointed to the tunnel behind her. Why don't you go and see for yourself? He hooked up a trace of evil smile. From the sound of it, she seems to be enjoying it, right? Gong Yimo's expression sank and she really walked behind him. During this process, she was unarmed and had to pass by 200 assassins alone. Gong Yimo raised the bomb and took large strides forward. That imposing manner seemed to be fearless. It caused the others to retreat instead, allowing her to smoothly walk into the crowd, and her speed was very fast. Li Ku glanced at her. She was always so bold and straightforward, but others would never be able to guess what she was going to do next. Take her down. Almost at the same moment he gave the order, all the assassins moved, and Gong Yimo also moved. Li Ku thought that since Gong Yimo was deep in the crowd, she would certainly not be able to ignite the fire, so he used this method to lure her forward. Gong Yimo, on the other hand, was not aiming for the little princess from the beginning. She was aiming for Li Ku. To catch bandits, first catch the king. There were enemies in all directions, and the space was too small. Gong Yimo could not use her full power. She could only use the method of transforming her internal energy into armor. Then, she ignored the swords that were slashing in front of her and rushed in front of Li Ku like an arrow. The moment he retreated, she grabbed his collar. This moment was too fast. Even if her internal energy had transformed, it was not invincible. The blades still left countless wounds on her body. Although they were shallow, they still tore her clothes. In the 7 or 8 steps she took to rush in front of Li Ku, she received no less than 100 sword. But she succeeded. She endured the pain all over her body and grabbed Li Ku by the throat, pushing him in front of her. Li Ku was stunned. He had heard before that the transformation of internal energy could dissipate most of the strength of the enemy's swords. But when he saw so many swords slashing towards him, the pressure in his heart was not something an ordinary person could withstand. While enduring the threat of being torn to pieces, she could still move towards her goal without any change in expression. This person, Gong Yimo. Did she really have such a thing as fear in her heart? Chapter 323. However, he was destined to never get an answer. The winner takes all. He had fallen into Gong Yimo's hands. She dragged him and quickly retreated into the tunnel behind her. Gong Yimo saw that Li Ku's men did not put down their weapons even after she caught him. It was obvious that Li Ku was only the temporary leader. Although they did not retreat, they maintained a distance of 10 steps and followed her from afar, as long as they did not interfere with her. Long Cheng's Ting Shui's voice became clearer and clearer. Listening to the commotion, she was actually being violated. Gong Yimo pursed her lips. Just as she was about to rush in, she turned a corner and suddenly found a group of people waiting for her in another cave. Surprisingly, there were people from 2 countries. Lu Yi's standards were too obvious. Gong Yimo saw through it immediately. At this moment, Li Ku, who was in her hands, shouted, "Quickly kill the little princess. She's here to save people." Lu Yi's men panicked. They originally had a plan and did not want to kill the little princess now. However, when they heard Li Ku's warning, they quickly went in to report to Chakran. The people in the tunnel outside were all from Daiyu State. The people in the tunnel in front were all from Lu Yi's men. The little princess was in the cave about 10 meters away from her. Gong Yimo decisively threw Li Ku towards Lu Yi's men. Then, she ignited the thing in her hands. In an instant, the fire was very dazzling. "Get down!" someone shouted. The others had never seen such a thing before and instinctively lay down. This gave Gong Yimo a chance to rush into the cave. At this moment, Chakran had yet to get up. She immediately saw the tortured Long Cheng's Ting Shui. Outside, it was just a simple flare. It had no lethality at all. But at this time, everyone could hear the sound of something rushing above their heads. It was rumbling. Everyone had a bad premonition. Before anyone could subdue Gong Yimo, someone ran in a panic and shouted, "The water is coming. The water is flooding in." Gong Yimo did not care what was happening outside. She grabbed Chakran with one hand and said to Long Cheng's Ting Shui, "Get up. The cave is going to collapse." Long Cheng Ting Shui acted as if she didn't hear anything. She just hugged her body and looked at Gong Yimo with resentment. Why didn't she come earlier or later? Why did she have to come when she was being humiliated? She must have done it on purpose. However, how could Gong Yimo be in the mood to care about her? It was a mess outside. She grabbed Chakran with one hand and Long Chengting Snow with the other. Before anyone could react, she ran in a certain direction. Chakran was also shocked by the sudden noise. He wanted to struggle, but he saw a flood of water rushing out of the tunnel. He no longer dared to struggle and allowed Gong Yimo to grab him and run. He was even afraid that he would be too slow. Some people were slow to realize the situation, but they still followed Gong Yimo. Since she dared to throw the game, she must know the exit. This water release was too timely. Gong Yimo secretly gave her subordinate a thumbs up. By the time she ran over, she was already exhausted. She threw Chakran and Long Chengting Shui to the ground. Soon, people came forward to take the two away. Then, Gong Yimo watched as the enemies came up one by one. She had to say that their reaction was too fast. Other than the unlucky people guarding the tunnel, most of the people she met earlier were not dead. Now that they saw Gong Yimo snatching Long Chengting Shui away, they all glared at her. The two sides confronted each other. At this time, Gong Yimo started to have a headache. Because the enemy outnumbered her by too much, and her reinforcements did not come. It seemed that she could only solve the problem through negotiation. What a pity. She originally wanted to capture the bearded man, but now it seemed that it was not possible. The bearded man was one of the leaders of the enemy. He could be used as a bargaining chip. At this time, Long Chengting Shui was covered with clothes by her own people and shivered. However, she glared at Gong Yimo with resentment. When Gong Yimo saw Li Ku come up, she could not help but sigh. "Hey, now that the situation is like this, I think we can make a deal." Li Ku was soaked and embarrassed. He glanced at the little princess who was snatched away and the captive Chakran and smiled coldly. "What do you want?" Gong Yimo smiled and said, "You see, now that the little princess has been rescued by me, you have no bargaining chips. But we still have a hostage. How about this? As long as you let us go, I will return this bearded man to you. I will not pursue today's matter." She could not pursue the matter even if she wanted to. At this time, she only had 60 people on her side, and most of them were the little princess's people. It was fine when the little princess was not here, but now that the little princess was here, they would not listen to her orders. The other side even took out their trump cards. Both sides added together did not die, and now there were hundreds of people. She could only admit defeat and hand over the hostage. Li Ku was also hesitating. Although he was unwilling, he did not have any bargaining chips. Even if he had more people than the other side, it was useless. After all, half of his people were Chakran's people. They definitely wanted to save their master, so the people he brought with him, against Gong Yimo, it was really difficult. Therefore, Li Ku thought for a while and was about to agree. But at this time, Long Chengting Shui spoke. She suddenly said to Li Ku and Chakran with a cold face. Kill Gong Yimo. As long as you kill her and send me back to the country, I will not pursue the matter of what you did to me today. Gong Yimo was stunned when she heard this. At this time, the imperial guards behind her quickly pointed their swords at Long Chengting Shui. The imperial guards only had 10 people, but Long Chengting Shui's people had more than 50 people. They shielded Long Chengting Shui behind them, afraid that Gong Yimo's people would hurt her. Gong Yimo did not expect the little princess to suddenly change sides. She did not expect that there would be someone who would rather cooperate with someone who humiliated her than obediently stay by the side of the person who saved her. Was there something wrong with her brain? Li Ku was also shocked and suspicious, but his brain was working quickly, thinking about the feasibility of her suggestion. Long Chengting Shui looked at the shocked Gong Yimo and sneered. Everyone here is your people and Lu Yi's people. Only Gong Yimo is our common enemy. You captured me just to cause chaos in the Daiyu state and seize the opportunity to seize power from the Crown Prince and Gong Dai. Instead of killing me, why don't you kill her? She is the one who will threaten you, the one who will cause chaos in the Daiyu state. She was indeed smart, but also very vicious. She grabbed her clothes and narrowed her eyes. Or, you don't have to kill her, but you can cripple her martial arts and humiliate her in front of everyone. It would be best if she could be ridden by thousands of people. I think the 2 most powerful men in the Daiyu state will go crazy when they see this scene. Chapter 324. Gong Yimo did not expect that Long Chengting Shui's intelligence would be used here. She had underestimated her enemy too much. She had made a good plan. First, she used Li Ku and Chakran's men to capture Gong Yimo. This way, Li Ku could easily achieve his mission of disrupting Daiyu state. Naturally, he would not let Long Chengting Shui die and cause a national disaster. Therefore, it was obvious that after capturing Gong Yimo, the 2 would work together to kill Chakran's men. At that time, Li Ku would bring Gong Yimo back to report, and she would bring Chakran back to Lu Yi. She would torture him to her heart's content and take revenge for her previous humiliation. It was a good idea to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Unfortunately, this intelligence was used on how to harm others. After thinking about the whole story, Long Chengting Shui looked at Chakran. She suppressed her disgust and resentment and said to the bastard who had just humiliated her, "Although you have done terrible things to me, as long as your men can help me capture Gong Yimo, I will forgive you. I won't pursue this matter. Yes, it's time to let bygones be bygones. You'll suffer later." On the other hand, Chakran saw that there were very few Tingxue players in Dragon City and that they posed no threat to him, so he agreed. He planned to capture Gong Yimo first, and then work with Li Ku to capture Tingxue in Dragon City. Both of them harbored ulterior motives and set their sights on Gong Yimo. Needless to say, Gong Yimo was disgusted by them. Li Ku's eyes flashed with a dangerous light. He did not care what these people were planning. As long as he could achieve his goal, it was enough. If that's the case, what are you waiting for? As soon as he said that, all the assassins got into formation and pointed their swords at each other. The 10 imperial guards on Gong Yimo's side also surrounded Gong Yimo and waited for her. Long Chengting Shui was a little proud. Her eyes flashed with a crazy light, as if putting Gong Yimo in a difficult situation was her greatest achievement and goal. Gong Yimo asked her, puzzled, "Can I ask why?" Gong Yimo was very curious about her brain circuit. Long Chengting Shui no longer had any scruples and said fiercely, "You can only blame yourself for stealing Gong Dai. He is your brother. You still did such a despicable thing. Since you are so shameless, I will teach you a lesson myself." Gong Yimo did not expect that Gong Dai was involved in this. She knew that Long Chengting Shui seemed to be interested in him, but it was not to this extent. Could it be that there was a past that she did not know about? She didn't care anymore. What she wanted to do was her business. Now, she moved her slightly sore arms and stood up. She looked around and snorted coldly. "You want to take me down with just people? That's too wishful thinking." However, Li Ku laughed. "Originally, it wouldn't have worked. However, the blades of my men have been stained with temporary poison. After seeing blood, it will cause their flesh to ache and they won't be able to exert any strength. In the beginning, if it was only my men, I wouldn't have dared to fight you head-on. But now, you have no outside help and no bargaining chips. I want to see if you can last longer, or if I have more men." At this time, Gong Yimou's expression became a little serious. Because Longcheng Tingshua's people had released Chakran, she was now fighting 1 against 3. Longcheng Tingshua laughed loudly. "Gong Yimou, you also have a day like this. Do it." In an instant, the enemies surrounded them from all directions. In an instant, they engaged in battle. Unknowingly, a layer of river water came out from the mine, mixed with mud and sand, slightly hindering their movements. Gong Yimou listened to Longcheng Tingshua's wanton laughter and felt her scalp tingle. Her hands were getting heavier and heavier, making her heart somewhat heavy. At this time, what should she do to break through the encirclement? At this time, the Imperial Guard beside her quickly said, "Princess, don't worry about us, we will cover you and leave first." Gong Yimou was stunned. She saw that each of them, in order to protect her, their eyes were filled with the will to die. She had never done anything like abandoning her comrades in her previous life, let alone in this life. She had to think of a way. What else could she use in her space? There must be a way. The situation was getting more and more urgent. The enemy had too many people, making Gong Yimou unable to take care of herself. "Princess, you should go. You can only avenge us if you live." Not knowing who shouted, Gong Yimou turned around and saw that person being hacked to death. At that moment, her eyes suddenly became bloodshot, tainted with a trace of killing intent. At this time, suddenly, a rain of arrows fell from the sky, instantly covering half the sky. The rain of arrows seemed to have eyes, not injuring Gong Yimou's people at all, while the others fell to the ground, dead. Who was it? Who was it? They actually had such a terrifying fighting strength. They instantly tore a hole in a difficult situation. Just as everyone raised their heads to look, another rain of arrows covered the sky. This time, it almost covered the entire battlefield. Seeing the people around her fall one by one, Gong Yimou's people stopped. They were in the middle of it all, but they were not affected at all. Gong Yimou raised her head, the sky was covered with arrows, the sound of the arrows piercing through the air, and the screams of the enemies around her. She stood there, strangely feeling a trace of gentleness. "It's Gong Dai." Suddenly, numerous archers appeared on all 4 sides of the hill. A person on a horse stood in front. His cold eyes instantly softened when he saw Gong Yimou. He also heaved a sigh of relief. Luckily, he was in time. Gong Dai. Everyone present was stunned. They did not expect to see Gong Dai in such a place. Hearing this, Long Cheng's snow-white face turned pale. At this time, her clothes were disheveled and she subconsciously hid behind the people who were still alive. Li Ku had not recovered from the panic of losing half of his men in an instant, when he was shocked by Gong Dai's appearance. He rode his horse and approached with large strides. His face was frosty and his skin was as white as snow. However, he wore a black robe that was filled with killing intent. White and black clashed together, his beauty was threatening and impactful. At this time, he was riding his majestic blood-sweat horse. The ground was littered with corpses and arrows, as well as the blood-stained muddy water. This hellish scene was mercilessly trampled by the horse's hooves, causing blood to splatter everywhere. Fear. So much so that the people who were still alive did not dare to move, as they watched him ride his horse towards Gong Yimou. This man, once he appeared, he caused a river of blood to flow. He did not say a word, but those people's faces were filled with fear and panic. A demon god. But at this moment, Gong Yimou felt that he could not be any gentler, no worse than a prince riding a white horse. Gong Yimou stood there, slightly gasping for breath. At this time, her hair was stuck to her forehead and her body was wounded. She certainly looked ugly. "Why are you here?" Gong Yimou's tone was slightly surprised. The moment she spoke, all the enemies who were still alive were all controlled by Gong Dai's men. One person controlling the entire battlefield, this was probably the atmosphere. Chapter 325. Gong Dai jumped off his horse and looked at Gong Yimou's sorry state. His eyes flashed with heartache and disapproval. He walked a few steps to Gong Yimo's side, as if they were a couple. He took out a handkerchief and wiped Gong Yimo's face. As he wiped, he used his special cold voice to say softly, "When I was in the country, I noticed that the Long family was acting strangely, so I followed them here. Fortunately, you're fine." Gong Yimo took his handkerchief in embarrassment and wiped her face. "Thank you very much." Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and smiled. "Royal sister, do you really want to thank me?" When he smiled, the entire valley seemed to fall silent for a moment. Most of the people had never seen Gong Dai smile, and even more were shocked. Long Cheng Ting Shui looked at him in a daze. This was the man she had liked for many years, but now he was treating another woman as if there was no one else around. Moreover, it was his sister. Why couldn't she be the only one who could overturn the world? Li Ku was the first to react. He said, "Gong Dai, how dare you be so sweet in front of so many people? Do you really think that the Dai Yu state is your own Dai Yu state?" Gong Dai glanced at him indifferently. Immediately, someone came forward and tied him up and gagged him. "Royal sister, you haven't said whether you want to thank me or not." Gong Dai turned his head and continued to tease Royal sister with a smile. Feeling the burning gazes from all around, Gong Yimo glared at him fiercely. She said fiercely, "Shut up." There were so many outsiders here. Could he restrain himself a little? Her glare shocked many outsiders who didn't know how they interacted with each other. It was rumored that Gong Dai was as cold as ice, and that he would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. His methods were vicious. They didn't expect that there would be someone who could glare at him so openly and even scold him. He was actually happy and not angry. Long Cheng Ting Shui couldn't hold it in anymore and said loudly, "Ha! Look at that." She even said that this consort was slandering her. "Look at her. Do you dare to say that she didn't seduce her brother? No secret communication? What chastity mark? It must be fake." Upon hearing this, Gong Dai's calm and tranquil temperament was swept away. In an instant, he became violent. With this change, his subordinates instantly brought Long Chengting Shui over and kicked her, wanting her to kneel down. She was willing to kneel in front of Gong Dai, but with Gong Yimo, she would rather die than do that. Unfortunately, she was pinned down and could not move. She could only kneel down and stare at Gong Yimo with resentment. "Royal sister, this woman is too noisy. It's better to kill her." When he said the word kill, it was as if the person he wanted to kill was not a princess of a country, but an ant that was not worth mentioning. Gong Ju's words deeply hurt Long Cheng's Ting Shui. Her eyes burst with hatred, but also with deep pain. She liked him so much and did so many things for him, but why didn't he even look at her? Why did he want to kill her so easily? "Gong Dai, why are you treating me like this? I like you so much. Why don't you like me? Do you know how long I've liked you?" Gong Dai looked at her. That look was extremely cold and had a trace of killing intent. "What does it have to do with me?" He actually said that her liking had nothing to do with him. Long Chengting Shui was stunned and then laughed out loud. Then, she suddenly unbuttoned her clothes. She didn't care that there were so many people present. She just looked at Gong Dai deeply and persistently. She even revealed her naked upper body. The moment she unbuttoned her clothes, Gong Yimo thought that she had gone crazy. "Gong Dai, look at me. How am I inferior to this slut?" The cold wind blew on her exposed skin, causing her to shiver. At this moment, Gong Dai suddenly covered Gong Yimo's eyes. "Don't look," he said softly. Gong Yimo's eyes were covered by him. She stood there in a daze. Her red lips were slightly opened as if she was silently inviting him. Gong Dai naturally wouldn't refuse. Therefore, in front of everyone present, and even in front of Long Chengting Shui, he kissed Gong Yimo's lips with slight urgency. At that moment, the world seemed to have quieted down. Long Chengting Shui knelt on the ground. After unbuttoning her clothes, her entire upper body was naked, so she was very cold. But this cold was far from the coldness in her heart. "Gong Dai." He actually kissed Gong Yimo in front of everyone. Everyone stared with their eyes wide open in disbelief. There were so many rumors that had been quelled, revived, and quelled again. It wasn't without reason. Gong Dai really liked Gong Yimo. The siblings were really, at that moment, Gong Yimo was stunned. Her brain buzzed and finally went blank. Her eyes were covered, which made her senses even more sensitive. She could feel Gong Ju's soft lips, the faint refreshing fragrance of his body, and the lingering longing under his light touch. They had only been apart for a few days, but she felt as if years had passed. Gong Yimo wanted to push Gong Dai away, but she didn't know if it was because of the drug, but her hands were powerless. Under such circumstances, she was kissed by Gong Dai for a long time, their breaths intertwined, and their heartbeats were slightly erratic. Finally, he pressed her head on his shoulder and announced to the world, "I, Gong Dai, only belong to royal sister." Gong Yimo's ears were pressed against his chest. The thumping sound made her dizzy. At that moment, she actually forgot that she should be pushing him away. How could he say such words in front of the world? Long Chengting Shui looked up and could only see the couple hugging each other. That was the biggest mockery of her actions. She undressed, but he ignored her. It was as if he was avoiding the plague. Was he afraid of hurting Gong Yimo's eyes? At this moment, more people came from afar. There were quite a few of them, and they were all Long Chengting Shui's people. They finally got the news and rushed over, but they were too late. At this moment, Buji saw his princess kneeling in front of Gong Dai with disheveled clothes and was immediately furious. "What did you do? How dare you humiliate me, Lu Yi?" He wanted to rush in with his people, but he was stopped by the imperial guards. Gong Dai was really impatient with their noise and asked softly, "Royal sister, how do you want to deal with this woman?" He didn't even look at Long Chengting Shui and only looked at Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo was still a little confused. She glanced at Long Chengting Shui and finally sighed. "She definitely can't die in my hands. At least, she can't die on this road." "Why not?" Gong Dai raised his eyebrows slightly. He smiled and tidied her hair, but the words he said were very cruel. "As long as royal sister is willing, I will let her marry any old man. After the old man dies, I will drag her to the grave with him. I guarantee that she will no longer be an eyesore to you." His voice wasn't loud, but the people nearby heard it clearly. Long Chengting Shui's face turned pale and she almost fainted. Gong Yimo shook her head. If Gong Dai really did that, he would have to bear the pressure of 2 countries for her. She didn't want to cause trouble for Gong Dai for her own selfish reasons. "No, I will continue to take her to Lu Yi. Don't worry. I can deal with her." Chapter 326. Gong Yimo's words made Gong Dai very disappointed. He just didn't want Gong Yimo to go to Lu Yi. She would be gone for so long, he would miss her a lot. However, Gong Yimo didn't realize this and patted his shoulder. "Thank you for being so considerate of me. Don't worry, I can do it." Gong Dai was about to speak when Buji angrily said, "You've gone too far. You've gone too far. Not only did you humiliate the princess, you also kidnapped my Prince of Lu Yi. What are you trying to do? I must report this to my king. I will make you pay for this." Buji also saw Chakran. Although he was curious as to why he was here and was restrained by Gong Dai's men, this made him even angrier. Since Gong Yimo had already made up her mind, Gong Dai would naturally respect her even if he didn't want to. Thus, when he saw Buji misunderstand, he frowned impatiently and waved his hand lightly. The imperial guards received the order and pushed the Lu Yi men that Gong Yimo brought over to Buji. More than 40 people died and now there were less than 10 left. Thus, they were very afraid of Gong Dai and quickly ran to Buji's side. Gong Dai coldly said, "Tell him what happened just now. What did this Lu Yi prince do?" With Gong Dai's order, the Lu Yi men who survived the chaos didn't dare to hide anything and quickly told Buji everything. For example, how did Gong Yimo bring them to rescue the princess, and how the people who kidnapped the princess were their Lu Yi prince and that person from Daiyu state. For example, how the princess was violated by their prince. Also, after the princess was released, she suddenly changed sides and wanted to join forces with the people who kidnapped her to deal with Gong Yimo. Finally, this Daiyu state's Prince Qi suddenly appeared and took control of the situation. Then, Prince Qi wanted to kill the princess, but Gong Yimo didn't agree and so on. When Buji heard this, he turned pale with fright. He glanced at the disheveled Lu Yi prince who was kneeling on the ground and then looked at the half-naked princess. He only felt the blood in his heart churning. He felt as if his old face was about to be completely thrown away by her. Buji's 3 values were still very upright, so he felt ashamed to show his face. However, he still had to solve the problem in front of him. So he held back the urge to vomit blood and knelt before Gong Dai and begged. "Great you, King Qi, please forgive me. I was too impulsive just now. Now, since your country's first princess is still willing to send us back to our country, I hope that King Qi will hand my country's prince over to me. I will definitely bring him back to admit his guilt and receive the punishment he deserves." In fact, Gong Dai had also decided to do so. Since the royal sister was unwilling to go back, he could only bring Li Ku back to deal with imperial concubine Long and the others. As for the little princess and that Prince Lu Yi, he would naturally hand them over to the royal sister to deal with. Perhaps after this battle, the royal sister would be able to relax a little when she arrived at Lu Yi. He glanced at Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo nodded. Gong Dai sighed silently. With a wave of his hand, the people holding down Ting Shui and Chakran released their hands. Both of them stood up. Gong Yimo rubbed her nose. "Since that's the case, I still have to hurry. I'll leave first." Gong Dai suddenly stepped forward and blocked her path. "Royal sister, you just said that you wanted to thank me." He was acting shamelessly. Gong Yimo was a little overwhelmed. While she was in a daze, Gong Dai quickly kissed her forehead. He sighed softly. "Remember, you owe me a thank you. When you come back, I will ask for it." Gong Yimo subconsciously took a step back, but he caught her hand and placed a bottle of medicine in her palm. "Although you have a lot of medicine, but don't let me see you injured every time I see you." He looked at her torn clothes and the faint traces of blood. His eyes flashed with heartache and a trace of suppressed madness. "If you let me see you injured again, I'm really afraid that I won't be able to control myself and lock you up, so that you won't run around anymore." He lowered his voice so only Gong Yimo could hear. At that moment, Gong Dai's serious tone made her feel that Gong Dai would really do that. Seeing her frightened and looking at him with a dazed little face, Gong Dai really felt defeated. He couldn't say a single harsh word and could only stroke her hair. "Don't make me worry again." No one dared to say anything about this intimacy. Only Long Cheng's Ting Shui suddenly laughed coldly. She put on her clothes again and looked at the couple in front of her. Her eyes flashed with hatred. One day, she'll sell Gong Yimo to the lowest brothel in the world. She also wanted Gong Dai to kneel on the ground and beg for her favor. With that thought, she laughed and walked towards Bugi. Anyway, Gong Dai had already promised Gong Yimo that he wouldn't kill her. She had nothing to be afraid of. "Let's go," she said gloomily to Bugi. "This." Bugi looked at Gong Dai and then looked at Gong Yimo. He was a little hesitant. His expression made Long Cheng's Ting Shui's eyes flash with killing intent. Then, she ignored him and left on her own. Gong Yimo waved at him. Only then did Bugi leave with his men. Holding the medicine bottle, she said to Gong Dai in embarrassment, "Then, I'll leave too." Gong Dai looked at her deeply for a while before nodding. "Take care of yourself." Gong Yimo promised again and again. Then, she led the rest of the people and left with Chakran. Watching her leave, Gong Ju suddenly felt as if he had been chasing after her all this time. The person he liked had the strongest mind and the broadest heart in the world. That was why he was willing to chase after her. He couldn't help but like her. "Take care of yourself because your body is mine. Your heart is also mine. My royal sister." When Gong Yimo returned to the team, Long Cheng's Ting Shui had already returned to the carriage. Gong Yimo was too lazy to care about her. Out of sight, out of mind. It wasn't that she didn't want to trouble Long Cheng's Ting Shui, but she really needed to clean up the wounds on her body. Also, Chakran was also a trump card. She needed to watch over him strictly. Soon, the team drove all the way to the border of Yuheng. At this time, the grass was already yellow. Looking north, there was no end in sight. At this speed, they would soon reach Lu Yi. The closer they got to Lu Yi, the more guilty the people of Lu Yi felt. They had let down the king of Lu Yi. So when they reached the door, they didn't dare to approach. The team started to set up camp. The bonfire slowly rose. Gong Yimo sat by the fire to expel the chill from her body. In her hand was the meat roasted by her subordinates. Eating in this kind of environment, it had a different flavor. But at this time, a burst of screams came, disturbing her mood. Recently, Long Cheng's Ting Shui didn't dare to do anything. But that was only in front of Gong Yimo. Facing Lu Yi's people, especially the maids by her side, she really didn't hold back when tormenting them. But this was other people's family matter. It wasn't good for her to interfere. But the noise in her ears grew louder and louder. Gong Yimo frowned slightly and endured it. Chapter 327. The noise continued. Listening to the sound, it seemed that Long Cheng's Ting Shui was using a whip to whip a woman. The sound of the whip breaking through the air and the woman's screams, in such a cold and desolate night, had an indescribable sense of misery. Gong Yimo endured for a long time without stopping. In the end, she angrily threw the bone in her hand away. She wanted to see what was wrong with Long Cheng's Ting Shui. At this time, Sai Kong stopped her. "Princess, that's Lu Yi's private matter." What he meant was that they shouldn't interfere. Gong Yimo didn't know that, she just felt annoyed. "Don't go over there. I'll go take a look myself." After saying that, she went to Lu Yi's side without looking back. Because of Long Cheng's Ting Shui's delay, Gong Yimo finished the barbecue and their camp hadn't been set up yet. Before they got close, Long Cheng's Ting Shui's sharp voice came over. During this time, her temperament had changed greatly. In the past, she would at least put on an act in front of others. Now, she seemed to have a fire in her heart and would directly attack if things didn't go her way. In the group, they could often hear her scolding and the maid's screams. However, this was the first time she wanted to kill someone without caring about anything. "Slut. Even you look down on this princess, don't you? Slut. Are you cursing this princess in your heart? Say something." Long Cheng's Ting Shui stood beside the carriage and a maid was lying on the ground. There were many people around them, but no one dared to stop her. She could only watch helplessly as the whip lashed mercilessly at the pitiful maidservant. Every time, she would let out a blood-curdling scream, Princess. She was covered in blood and couldn't speak. She begged with bloody tears, "I didn't. Princess, I didn't." Slap. Long Cheng's Ting Shui whipped her face, and in return, she let out the sharpest scream. Fresh blood flowed down her face. Her face would definitely be disfigured in an instant. "Didn't." Long Cheng's Ting Shui's eyes flashed fiercely. "You still dare to quibble? Go to hell, slut." Her raised hand was grabbed by Buji. Buji couldn't watch anymore and made such an offensive move. "Princess. You're a princess, not a horse-raising shrew. I hope you have some self-respect." Buji was a warrior and couldn't stand Long Cheng's method of venting anger on innocent people. Her whip was clearly for Gong Yimo to see. Her hand was caught by Bugi, and Long Cheng Ting Snow was unable to break free several times. Her sinister eyes stared at Bugi, and that look was even more terrifying than a poisonous snake. "Let go." Bugi refused to let her go. "Princess, you have to tell me what she did to deserve such treatment." Long Cheng's Ting Shui was furious. She kicked the girl next to her. The kick landed right on her soft abdomen, causing her to curl into a ball in pain. Only then did she vent her anger a little. "This slut splashed boiling hot tea on this consort's body." She's Shui's Ting Shuether maid on the ground wanted to explain, but she was in so much pain that she couldn't open her mouth. She didn't do it on purpose. The princess said she wanted to drink water, and the water that was just boiling. But when she brought it over, she refused to drink it. She said she wanted to wait for the water to cool down. But the porcelain bowl wasn't insulated. Her hand was scalding hot. In the end, she couldn't hold on any longer and accidentally knocked over the bowl. The water splashed onto Long Cheng's Ting Shui's skirt, but it definitely didn't burn her. Buji naturally knew she was being unreasonable. He said in a low voice, "Even so, she's already been punished. You're not allowed to hit her." Hearing that, Long Cheng's Ting Shui coldly retracted her hand and looked at him coldly. "You'd better not interfere. Otherwise, when we return to Lu Yi, I'll definitely complain to Imperial Brother. I'll say you've been insulting me the whole way. You. She's shameless. Buji was so angry that he was trembling. But he really didn't dare to touch her. Long Cheng's Ting Shui smiled proudly. She raised her whip and lashed it down again. The scream sounded again, but it was gradually weakening. There was even a hint of death in the voice. If this continued, she definitely wouldn't be able to survive. The hearts of Lu Yi's people present were filled with a kind of sadness like a fox grieving for a rabbit's death. This servant was also a human. Even if she was going to die, she shouldn't be tormented like this. This was simply not treating her as a human, but they didn't dare to say anything. They only felt more and more disappointed. Enough. When Gong Yimo walked over, she saw such a scene. What were these Lu Yi's people doing? Didn't they see that Long Cheng's Ting Shui was about to beat someone to death? When Gong Yimo came, Long Cheng's Ting Shui subconsciously stopped whipping. At this time, she was holding the whip in her hand. Her cheeks were red. Obviously, she was having a lot of fun. What are you doing here? Her chin was slightly raised, but her whole body was alert. Could it be that Gong Yimo still wanted to interfere with her Lu Yi's matters? She was thinking too highly of herself. Gong Yimo looked at the person on the ground and frowned. Are you all blind? Why aren't you dragging her away? As soon as she spoke, the surrounding Lu Yi's people quickly moved. Seeing that they were so obedient to Gong Yimo, Long Cheng's Ting Shui was angry. She stepped forward and blocked the crowd. I'll see who dares. She coldly stared at Gong Yimo, Jiyugua's eldest princess. This is Yuheng, and these are Lu Yi's people. What qualifications do you, a princess of Daiyu state, have to order them? Gong Yimo felt that this person was unreasonable. If you do this, aren't you afraid that your imperial brother will be in a difficult position and lose the hearts of the people? Ha ha ha. Long Cheng's Ting Shui laughed as if she heard a joke. Hearts of the people? They dare. Her gaze swept around. Everyone turned their faces away, not daring to speak. Only then did she sneer with pride. She's just a lowly servant. It's her honor that I beat her. As she spoke, she fiercely stomped on the servant girl's finger on the ground and crushed it with force. The girl who was originally powerless to scream screamed again. In the midst of the scream, Long Cheng's Ting Shui was like an evil spirit as she slowly and coldly said, Come, you tell this meddlesome person, do you deserve to die? Is it your honor that I punish you? Speak. Yes, it's this servant's honor, woo-woo. I beg the princess to, let me go. Her voice was broken and many people closed their eyes, unable to bear to watch. In their hearts, they hated Long Cheng's Ting Shui to the extreme. Do you see? Long Cheng's Ting Shui turned her face to the side and gloomily looked at Gong Yimo. In the light of the fire, her face flickered, but her foot didn't relax at all. She begged this princess to do this. The servant girl raised her blooded face and screamed miserably. It turned out that Long Cheng's Ting Shui increased the strength of her foot again. Her finger was almost crushed. Gong Yimo couldn't bear it anymore. She took a step forward and directly grabbed Long Cheng's Ting Shui's collar and lifted her up. In this way, that servant girl was finally rescued. She was pulled away by kind-hearted servants to prevent her from suffering again. Gong Yimo. Are you crazy? This is our Lu Yi's private matter. I'm happy to let a few people die. It's none of your business. Chapter 328. With a muffled bang, Gong Yimo grabbed Long Cheng Ting Shui and pressed her against the carriage with anger. I'm going to interfere. Not only will I interfere, I'm also going to teach you a lesson. You really don't know what's good for you. As she approached, her aura seemed to materialize. The little princess was scared and looked at Buji for help. Are you dead? Imperial brother is really blind. As Lu Yi's person, you actually don't help me when I'm being humiliated. Buji didn't want to help her, but she was right. This was Lu Yi's matter and she was Lu Yi's princess. He couldn't ignore it. So he endured his reluctance and slowly walked to Gong Yimo and said to Gong Yimo, Please let her go, princess of Jiyu country. Buji glanced at the little princess's ferocious face and gritted his teeth. This is Lu Yi's matter after all. If he was really taught a lesson by an outsider, where would Lu Yi put his face? Hearing this, Long Cheng Ting Shui proudly raised her chin at Gong Yimo. She gasped for breath and said sarcastically, "Did you hear that? This is my, Lu Yi's, matter. You better let me go. I'll give that slut an interesting death." She stared at Gong Yimo and every word was like a curse from the abyss of hell. "I'm going to cut off that slut's fingers one by one. I won't let her die. I'm going to tie her to the back of the carriage. If she dies before we reach Lu Yi, I'll demote her brother and sister to slaves. If she doesn't die, I'll make her the lowest military prostitute. I want her to beg for death. I want her to beg for death." Although she was talking about the pitiful maid, anyone with a discerning eye knew that this was Long Cheng Ting Shui's imagination and curse towards Gong Yimo. However, she couldn't touch Gong Yimo now, so she could only rely on tormenting others to ease her hatred. She wanted to torture people in front of Gong Yimo. She also wanted to kill people. What could Gong Yimo do? "Let me go if you know what's good for you. Lu Yi's matters are none of your business." But since Gong Yimo made a move, how could she let it go? At this time, she was only an arm's length away from Long Cheng Ting Shui. She bent her elbow and took a step forward, sneering, "None of my business? Haha, I'll let you see if I can interfere or not." As she spoke, she actually reached out and snatched the whip from the other party's hand. Then, she pushed Long Cheng Ting Shui to the ground and fiercely swung the whip. The whip made a crisp pa sound in the air. Long Cheng Ting Shui's Gong Yimo. "How dare you?" As she spoke, her body kept shrinking back. Then, she said to Boogie, who was already stunned, "Are you stupid? Why don't you to stop?" To Cheng Ting Shui's to Shui to Shui to Cheng Ting Shui. Gong Yimo raised her whip and coldly spoke to them as the stone chips flew. "Don't move. In case I accidentally lose control of my strength and end up killing her. That wouldn't be good." Her words put the people around her in a difficult position. Boogie looked at the little princess who was shivering on the ground and said, "Princess Jiu Guo, this is not appropriate. You don't have the right to teach Lu Yi's princess a lesson." "I don't have the right." Gong Yimo suddenly made a move and slapped Long Cheng Ting Shui's leg. She really slapped her. "Ah." Long Cheng Ting Shui hugged her leg with trembling hands and looked at Gong Yimo with resentment. "I want you to die. I want you to die. As you can see, this has nothing to do with the country. I'm just taking revenge. I saved her out of kindness, but she betrayed me and almost killed me. Why can't I teach her a lesson?" Gong Yimo's cold aura was threatening. "She's a princess, and I'm a princess too. There's no reason why I can't repay her for scheming against me. Since she has the intention to harm others, it's not too much for me to slap her, right?" With a wave of her hand, the whip was raised high and fell on Long Cheng Ting Shui's shoulder again. "Pa." This caused everyone present to tremble. "Ah." Long Cheng Ting Shui couldn't help but cry. Her shoulder was burning. She didn't dare to be ruthless and begged Boogie, "Uncle Boogie, save me. She wants to kill me." Boogie was brought back to reality by her cry. In the end, he couldn't watch his princess being beaten. He said to Gong Yimo firmly, "Princess, please stop. Otherwise, even if I have to fight to the death, I'll still do it." However, not many people responded to him. Instead, it was Gong Yimo who laughed. She waved her hand and 49 imperial guards rushed over. They formed a circle and separated Lu Yi's people. Although they were outnumbered, their aura was definitely superior. "I'm going to teach her a lesson today. You can save her, but I'll say this first. If you don't move, I'll slap her 20 times. If you move one person, I'll slap one more time. You can see if I'm joking." With that, she raised her hand again. The third time. Bang. This time, Long Cheng's Ting Shui shriek. She glared at Gong Yimo and the others with hatred. However, she didn't have the strength to call for help. She didn't feel it when she was slapped, but when she was slapped, it was really painful. "Princess." Boogie was a little anxious. However, he saw that Gong Yimo didn't seem to be faking it. Moreover, Gong Yimo, the princess of Daiyu State, was famous for keeping her word. If she said 20 times, it was 20. If he and the others really moved, the little princess would suffer even more. 4. Pa. Ah. It hurts. Help, help. Long Cheng Ting Shui screamed. She was delicate and precious. When had she ever suffered like this? Buji clenched his hands into fists. He looked at Gong Yimo and said, "Why do you have to do this? Princess of Jiyu State, what good will this do for you when you go to Lu Yi?" "Of course." Gong Yimo smiled and nodded. "I feel good after I've vented my anger." There was nothing Bugi could do about it, because he looked around and found that even his own people had a gloating expression on their faces. Long Cheng's Ting Shui being beaten up was simply the wish of the people. Even if his people made a move, they would not be a match for her. Now, he could only hope that Gong Yimo would be gentler and let these 20 lashes pass quickly. Seeing that Buji wasn't speaking, Long Cheng Ting Shui panicked. She crawled a few steps in Buji's direction in fear. Uncle Buji, help." However, Gong Yimo's whip followed her like a shadow. When the whip landed on her leg, she was in so much pain that she couldn't even crawl. In the end, Buji couldn't bear it and turned his head away. Long Cheng Ting Shui was stunned. Then, she crawled toward the others. "Save me. All of you, save me. When I return to the country, I'll definitely reward you handsomely." However, she crawled on the ground and begged in a circle. The Imperial Guards blocked the bodies of Lu Yi and the others, but they didn't block their sight. In their eyes, Long Cheng Ting Shui read a kind of emotion called indifference. What was going on? She was clearly Lu Yi's most favored little princess. Gong Yimo took a few steps forward and smiled devilishly. The whip in her hand was like a talisman that hastened her death. "Are you ready?" The dim light in her eyes flickered. "There are still 15 lashes left." Chapter 329. Gong Yimo. "You lunatic. You'll die a horrible death." She turned her head and said fiercely to Gong Yimo. Slap. Gong Yimo rewarded her with the 6th whip, and she screamed in pain. Bitch, you're a vicious woman. How dare you pretend to be so kind in front of Gong Dai? Slap. Gong Yimo saw that her face was scrunched up in pain, and cold sweat and tears flowed down her face. She finally vented her anger. She had wanted to teach her a lesson for a long time, but she held it in for the sake of the big picture. But now, she didn't want to hold it in anymore. "So what if I'm vicious? You're kind. Then I'd like to see if anyone will come to save you." Gong Yimo didn't show any mercy. Why did it sound so good when she said something like this? Long Cheng Ting Shui was almost crying after being whipped a few times. She never thought that Gong Yimo was such a crazy person. She didn't consider the consequences of her actions. But what she didn't know was that it wasn't that she didn't consider the consequences, but that she had already thought of countermeasures. Just like these few lashes, she used her inner strength. It hurt a lot, but there were no external injuries at all. She was not afraid of anything, she just wanted to hit her. After a few lashes, Long Cheng Ting Shui wanted to faint, but because it was too painful, she stayed awake and endured the torture with a clear mind. Buji. Dwuluan. After a few more lashes, Long Cheng Ting Shui felt that she couldn't take it anymore. She was going to die. So she called out the names of Lu Yi and the others again. You want to watch her kill me, right? Gong Yimo said at the right time, "There are only 5 lashes left. Are you sure you want to interfere?" Ambassador Lu Yi couldn't bear to see her like this, but he was suppressed by her voice in time and couldn't say a word. Buji raised his hand and put it down. Finally, he sighed and said, "Princess Jiyu Guo, why do you have to do this? What good would it do to have a bad relationship with Long Cheng's Ting Shui?" Gong Yimo indifferently pointed her whip at the shivering Long Cheng Ting Shui on the ground and said, "When I saved her, she wanted to kill me. Why should I show mercy to a person who wants to kill me?" With that, he swung his hand and slapped Long Cheng Ting Shui's back, making her whole body lie on the ground, unable to move. Humiliation. Endless humiliation. Dust flew into the air, covering her face that was covered in cold sweat and tears. At this moment, she was covered in dust and dirt, lying on the ground like a dog struggling at death's door. And these people that her royal brother had sent to protect her, were coldly watching from the sidelines. She hated them so much. She wouldn't let any of them off. Everyone who had seen her miserable state had to die. Gong Yimo whipped her back again, causing her to twitch all over. But this time, she clenched her teeth and did not scream. This surprised Gong Yimo. She slowly got up. That pair of venomous eyes seemed to be dipped in poison, looking at her as if she was going to pounce and bite her at any time. Gong Yimo, slut. I will let you die, let you die. Gong Yimo laughed without a care. Didn't you feel very good when you whipped her just now? Didn't you just say that it was her honor to be whipped by you? Then if I whip you, do you also feel honored? Long Cheng Ting Shui stared straight at her, the veins on her forehead popping out. I want to sell you to the lowest grade brothel. For one money, you can do it once. Is that so? Gong Yimo calmly shrugged her shoulders, but she used her strength and the whip came down, causing Long Cheng Ting Shui to cry out and lie on the ground. In any case, you are a princess. I don't know what your mother who was born as a courtesan taught you. Go back and tell your mother that you have become a princess. Don't keep thinking about the unbearable past. You. Long Cheng Ting Shui was lying on the ground, almost vomiting blood. At this time, her hair was scattered and it was as scary as it could be, and what Gong Yimo said was the thing that she hated the most in her heart. That is, her mother was born as a courtesan. This was her disgrace. I will chop you into 8 pieces. 5 horses. Her face was covered in tears and dust, only her pair of bloodshot eyes looked like they could eat people. And all of you. Her eyes swept around, seemingly looking at the imperial guards, but Gong Yimo knew that she was talking to Lu Yi and the rest. All of you must die. All of you must die. Gong Yimo's whip came down and broke her vicious curse. She lay on the ground again. There was no part of her body that did not hurt. At this time, she lay on the ground and did not have the strength to curse anymore. She could only use her pair of eyes to glare at people. With deep malice. She was obviously so miserable, but there was no one around her who sympathized with her. Their conscience must have been eaten by dogs. At this time, they actually looked on coldly and watched her being humiliated. Moreover, it was by Gong Yimo who humiliated her. They saw her, a princess, being beaten like a beast, unable to get up from the ground. They deserved to die. They deserved to die without a complete corpse. And Gong Yimo. She did not dare to raise her head to glare at Gong Yimo, but her hatred for her had reached the peak. She wanted to strip Gong Yimo of her clothes and hang her on the city gate for everyone to see. She wanted to let the horse take her body, so that she could no longer pretend to be pure in front of Gong Dai. She wanted her to die. Pa. This last whip was so painful that Long Cheng Ting Shui screamed weakly and her whole body went limp. Gong Yimo threw the whip aside and walked in front of her. Long Cheng Ting Shui raised her head and saw a pair of extremely cold eyes. I hope that from now on, until we reach Lu Yi, you will know your place. Gong Yimo said her request with a smile, but the darkness in the depths of her eyes was frightening. Don't force me to kill you. Enough. Buji rushed out of the way of the imperial guards and protected Long Cheng Ting Shui under his body. You said you wanted to take revenge, so you have beaten her. Don't provoke her anymore. Gong Yimo smiled. Snakes don't have a heart, only their nature. Protect her. I think that when we reach Lu Yi, the first person she will bite to death will be you. However, this matter did not concern her, so she casually reminded him and left. At this time, Long Cheng Ting Shui was being supported by Buji. Her whole body was in pain, but when she saw that Buji was shocked by Gong Yimo's words and fell into deep thought, she endured the pain and hatred. She grabbed Buji's arm and said pitifully, Uncle Buji, I know I was wrong, I know I was wrong, don't believe her, don't abandon me. Seeing her like this, Buji hurriedly threw his previous thoughts aside, but because he was afraid that Long Cheng Ting Shui would fall into Gong Yimo's hands again, he could not help but say earnestly, Princess, you have to lower your head when you are under someone else's roof. You should not provoke her in the future. Everything will be fine when we return to Lu Yi. Isn't it because you people are useless? Chapter 330. Long Cheng Ting Shui thought with hatred. If it weren't for the fact that they were useless, 1,000 people couldn't beat 50 people. Would she have suffered such humiliation? If it weren't for the fact that they were useless and couldn't help her take revenge, would she have thought of escaping by herself? Would she have been caught by Chakran and humiliated by him? If it weren't for the fact that they were useless, she would have already cut Gong Yimo into 1,000 pieces, instead of being whipped and tortured by her. But this useless man actually wanted her to endure and compromise. She almost broke her teeth from clenching them. Yes. Uncle Boogie. I will never provoke her again, she cried, but she swore in her heart. These people who had seen her humiliated, who had seen her worst side, she would not let any of them go. She would kill them all. Boogie sighed. Raki is a good girl. She is recuperating at Uncle's place. These days, let Kebu take care of you. You. Take good care of your injuries. Long Cheng Ting Shue nodded, lowered her eyes, and hid the resentment in her heart. Just you wait, all of this humiliation, she would take them all back one by one. On the road again, Long Cheng Ting Shue was a lot more well-behaved. She was no longer like before, making all kinds of unreasonable trouble. Now, she was extremely obedient, causing Boogie to feel very guilty. He comforted and took care of her all the way, but did not let Gong Yimo worry anymore. Princess, tomorrow we will arrive at Lu Yi's border city, Raging Fire City. As Sai Kong said this, he looked at Gong Yimo with some worry, because when they arrived at Lu Yi, there was still a tough battle to fight. Moreover, there was always a hidden danger by his side. Several times, he found that Long Cheng Ting Shue looked at the princess with a terrifying gaze. He was really afraid that she would do something again. However, after saying a few times, Gong Yimo did not respond. Sai Kong found that the princess was in a daze again. For some reason, ever since the last time. After Gong Dai kissed her in public, Gong Yimo could not control herself. Occasionally, when she thought of him, she would be lost in thought. It was dark. What was he doing? But there was definitely no answer to this question. It was better to go to sleep. The next few days were very peaceful. Gong Yimo originally thought that once they arrived at Lu Yi, Long Cheng's Ting Shue would cause trouble. Who knew that she was very well behaved along the way? Every time Gong Yimo went to meet the Castellan to clear the level, she did not make a fuss. This made Gong Yimo feel that something was wrong. When Long Cheng Wuji received the letter from Dai Yu State, he had already gotten over his anger. However, he was still rational because Dai Yu State did not exaggerate the truth. The contents of the letter were similar to what Boogie had reported. But when he thought about how his married sister had been rejected like this, it was a great humiliation. Therefore, the closer Long Cheng and Ting Shue got to Lu Yi Huadu, the more restless he felt. Unfortunately, his imperial concubine mother was still so worrisome. Long Cheng Wuji and Long Cheng's Ting Shue were both born of the current imperial concubine, Hua She. The only son left behind by the previous imperial concubine had already been killed by Long Cheng Wuji. Now, there were 4 of them in the family and there were no outsiders. However, the only people who had a headache were the old King Lu Yi and his imperial concubine, Hua She. They were too biased towards their youngest daughter, Long Cheng's Ting Shue. After hearing about this matter, they insisted that Dai Yu State was in the wrong. It was the Dai Yu State's princess who provoked Long Cheng's Ting Shue first. Otherwise, why did Long Cheng's Ting Shue, who was such a good girl, harm her instead of others? Long Cheng Wuji was so angry that his head hurt from the 2 elders' sophistry that he simply ignored them. In any case, with him watching, he was not afraid that they would cause any trouble. Finally, Long Cheng's Ting Shue returned. Old Lu Yi, Wang Duoda, and his wife, Hua She, had been waiting at the city gate for a long time. Long Cheng Wuji felt embarrassed, but now was not the time to shed all pretense of cordiality. Therefore, he also waited at the gate and watched coldly as the troops got closer and closer. Because it was a family scandal, Long Cheng Wuji had long driven the commoners away. He did not bring any ministers, so there were only soldiers at the huge city gate. Most of these soldiers were old Lu Yi, Wang Duoda's men. He even said righteously that this was to let the people of Dai Yu State see Lu Yi's heroic bearing. Soon, the troops entered the city. As soon as Gong Yimo entered the city, she felt that the atmosphere in the city was a little too oppressive. Among the large group of soldiers, the expressions of the 3 leaders were not good. Gong Yimo smiled. At this time, Buji and the others stepped forward in shame and knelt in front of Long Cheng Wuji. We have failed the king's great trust, please punish us. Naturally, King Lu Yi would not punish him. This matter had nothing to do with him. On the other side, Long Cheng's Ting Shui happily got off the carriage. Looking at her parents, her eyes were filled with tears. Father, mother. When she saw her long-awaited family, she quickly wanted to go over. However, she was stopped by Gong Yimo. What are you doing? Long Cheng's Ting Shui glared angrily at her. Gong Yimo, this is Lu Yi. If you know what's good for you, hurry and let go of this consort. Duo De and his wife, Hua Shi, also woke up from their joy of seeing their daughter. They looked at Gong Yimo darkly. Gong Yimo smiled. It's nothing. I just wanted to go with you and pay a visit to these people. As she spoke, she pulled Long Cheng's Ting Shui towards the supreme ruler of Lu Yi. In order to avoid arousing suspicion, none of Lu Yi's ministers were present. Thus, Gong Yimo saved herself the trouble and directly dragged Long Cheng's Ting Shui towards Long Cheng Wuji. How dare you? Duo De suddenly roared angrily. Soon, a line of people blocked her path. Let go of Ting Shui. She is my princess of Lu Yi, not your servant. Gong Yimo grabbed the panic-stricken Long Cheng's Ting Shui and laughed like a rascal. It's impossible for me to let her go. There are so many of you eyeing her covetously. If I let her go, do you think I can still stand here and talk? Duo De didn't expect Gong Yimo to be so cunning. His original plan was to seize Gong Yimo while she was unprepared. However, she kept dragging Ting Shui, making it difficult for him to make a move. Long Cheng's Ting Shui saw that Gong Yimo was so difficult to deal with. She couldn't help but look pitifully at Long Cheng Wuji. Imperial brother, her eyes were filled with tears. This imperial brother really made Long Cheng Wuji's heart soften. He glared at Long Cheng's Ting Shui in disappointment, then said to Gong Yimo with an unhappy expression, Princess Jiyu Guo, please let my little sister go. If there's something, let's sit down and discuss it properly. He looked at Gong Yimo threateningly. This was his territory. She'd better not refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. There's no need to sit down. Let's stand here and discuss the case first. Then, she said to Sikong, bring him here. Sikong obeyed and brought Chakran, who had been locked up for a long time. At this moment, he looked dispirited, as if he had aged 10 years. Long Cheng Wuji had also received a message from Buji regarding this matter, so his face immediately darkened. Princess, what is the meaning of this? Gong Yimo said calmly, nothing. If you don't want your sister's reputation to be ruined, why don't you dismiss all the soldiers? She was so domineering even in someone else's territory. Her lawless appearance made it hard for people to hate her. Chapter 331. Impudent. The old consort was furious and slapped the carriage, let go of Ting Shui. Then, she glared at her son, Wuji. Are you going to watch her bully your sister like this? Long Cheng Ting Shui was completely dumbfounded. She didn't expect Gong Yimo to threaten her to force her father and mother to retreat. How could she let her succeed? She still wanted to see Gong Yimo get captured and humiliated. Long Cheng Wuji frowned. He looked at Gong Yimo and then at his useless uncle. He didn't know who ordered him to do such a thing after the Dark Empress, but now he had to clean up the mess. Also, they still had old scores to settle with Gong Yimo. Are you sure you want to do this? Isn't it better to return to the palace with Benwang? Some things have to be explained now. Gong Yimo remained unmoved and sneered at the surrounding soldiers who were glaring at her. I just entered the city and you already have an army to suppress me. I really wonder if there will be an even bigger surprise waiting for me in the palace. With that, she pulled Long Cheng's Ting Shui, whose face had turned pale, and impatiently said, this is your last chance. Send these people away. Otherwise, I don't mind telling them about him right now, and let the whole Lu Yi know what your Wangye has done. At this time, Long Cheng Ting Shui was a little scared and begged her parents, Father, Mother, save me. The old Lu Yi king and consort were furious when they heard this. Gong Yimo dared to threaten them with Ting Shui's reputation. But Long Cheng Wuji was here, they couldn't ignore his words. The white-haired Dodd said, Son, this woman is so arrogant, you must punish her severely. Seeing that they still didn't give up on retreating, Gong Yimo wasn't someone to be trifled with. She sneered and pointed at Chakran. Since that's the case, let's all listen together. You're Prince of Luyi. No. Don't say it. Long Chengting Shui stared and interrupted her in panic. At this time, she didn't want to catch Gong Yimo. Anyway, there was still a long way to go. For the sake of her reputation, she couldn't let Gong Yimo be exposed now. So she quickly said to everyone with a cold face, "Back off. All of you, back down." Hearing Long Cheng Ting Shui's words, Long Cheng Wuji waved his hand. "All of you, stand down." Seeing that everyone had retreated and there were less than 100 people left, Long Cheng and Ting Shui were relieved. Gong Yimo was also satisfied and told Sikong to keep an eye on Chakran. He was still useful. Then, let's discuss the first matter. Gong Yimo was standing on the ground while Long Cheng Wuji and the others were sitting on the high palanquin. She was holding Long Cheng Ting Shui's hand, giving off an imposing aura. The cooperation between the two countries is a good thing, and the marriage alliance is also the icing on the cake. But what does Luyi mean? Your princess came to my country, and the first thing she did wasn't to choose a husband, but to frame me during my country's holy land ceremony. Seeing that no one spoke, Gong Yimo continued, Luyi was the one who initiated the cooperation, and so was the marriage alliance. But she came and did such a thing. I can't help but suspect that this is Luyi's scheme. So, my Daiyu state doesn't want this princess anymore, and Luyi must give me an explanation. This is preposterous. Dodd couldn't stand his daughter being humiliated like this. His beard curled up. I, Luyi, haven't asked your Daiyu state for an explanation. You humiliated my, Luyi's, most precious princess, and you still dare to ask us for an explanation. Unfortunately, Gong Yimo revealed her white teeth. I am also Daiyu state's most precious princess. Why can't I have her? She didn't blush at all when she said this. Even Long Cheng Wuji couldn't help but smile when he heard this. How shameless. The old princess consort concluded angrily. Long Cheng Wuji thought for a moment, then his face turned serious and he said coldly, asking for an explanation is too overbearing. After all, didn't you send Ting Shui back to her country? Her reputation is ruined. Isn't this compensation enough? Gong Yimo smiled, that's that. She deserved to be sent back to her country, but my reputation was ruined for no reason. Shouldn't I ask for an explanation? Long Cheng Wuji smiled when he heard this. He calmly walked down from the high-up sedan, then approached Gong Yimo step by step. Today, he was wearing a very domineering yellow robe with a fur coat draped over his shoulders. His deep and exquisite face was even more enchanting. When he looked at someone with his blue eyes that were almost purple, it gave off a feeling of special focus. You treated this prince like that in Daiyu state. This prince, didn't I ask you for an explanation? Long Cheng Wuji lowered his voice. His words were only heard by Gong Yimo and Long Cheng Ting Shui. Ignoring Long Cheng Ting Shui's astonished gaze, Gong Yimo said very calmly, you can ask for it in the future, but we're talking about Long Cheng Ting Shui now. When she said this, a cold light flashed in her eyes. She framed me, and then she almost killed me on the road. I don't know how King Luyi wants to resolve this matter. King Luyi glanced at his sister and frowned. What compensation do you want? Gong Yimo said, just mention it. King Luyi smiled. This prince is very sincere about cooperating with Daiyu state. I don't think you'll go too far. Gong Yimo looked up at him. When she was scheming, her eyes were very bright, and Long Cheng Wuji was stunned. Previously, you said that you wanted to open up a road with Yuheng. Coincidentally, my Daiyu state also wants to interfere. This matter made Long Cheng Wuji frown deeply. Daiyu state had already taken the initiative in the matter of the bank, and the water route was also well connected. Now, if they wanted to interfere with the land route, their ambition was too big. Gong Yimo also knew that Long Cheng Wuji was vigilant, so she said unhurriedly, don't refuse first. Why don't you listen to my plan? I've always been a person who pays attention to a win-win situation, and I've never let anyone suffer a loss. Her smile revealed her sharp canine teeth. The sky was obviously gloomy, but her beauty seemed to be impactful. No, her entire being was impactful. She dared to hold his little sister hostage at the entrance of his country's capital and speak with him with such fervor and assurance. Long Cheng Wuji's Adam's apple bobbed. Speak. Gong Yimo smiled. Do you know the reason why I didn't choose to go directly north when I was in Daiyu State, and then go west to get to Luyi? Instead, I went west first, then north, and purposely went through Yuheng to get to Luyi? Long Cheng Wuji shook his head. I don't know. Gong Yimo smiled. I'm personally testing whether it's feasible to open up a road from Daiyu State to Yuheng and Luyi by land. Her words shocked Long Cheng Wuji, and she continued, on my way here, I've taken note of many places that can be used as horse ranches and relay stations. If I change the suitable relay stations and open spaces on my way here into transfer stations that combine horse ranches and relay stations, it won't take much. 12 horse ranches can link up the 3 countries. Aren't you curious about this business? Chapter 332. Gong Yimo saw that Long Cheng Wuji was deep in thought. She continued, perhaps you don't understand. When I left, I promised to give you a good idea to complete the transportation route between Luyi and Yuheng. But now, I want to interfere. My idea will only be beneficial to you, Luyi. For example, Long Cheng Wuji stared at her and asked. For example, if we set up 18 medium-sized horse farms on the road I came from, the merchants from Daiyu State would not need to hire guards. As long as they were entrusted to the horse farms of the 3 countries and paid a transportation fee, they would be able to transport the goods along with the people. The horse farms would not only allow the horses to be replaced, they would also be given time to rest. They would also be provided with lodging and food, so they would not have to sleep in the wilderness. On normal days, the horse farms could also be used to train riding and produce horses. There are countless benefits. Gong Yimo carefully observed Long Cheng Wuji's expression. Although he was expressionless, he was definitely tempted. She couldn't help but use a bewitching tone to continue. From Daiyu State to Luyi, or from Luyi to Daiyu State, the number of horses would be maintained at a balanced point. When the time comes, the national defense between the countries could also set up a tax point. I believe that in the future, it would be a considerable amount of income. Of course, there were many other benefits she did not mention. After all, if one wanted to know those, they would have to pay a price. But for now, it was enough that they could reach an agreement. This was also her biggest goal in coming to Luyi. Finding trouble with Long Cheng Ting Shui was just a side trip. Long Cheng Wuji heard and did not directly refuse. Instead, he looked at Gong Yimo with a pair of bright eyes. He sighed in his heart. She was really a treasure. This matter is of great importance. Why don't you enter the palace for a chat? When Long Cheng Ting Shui saw that the 2 of them were chatting happily, she was furious. Imperial brother, you. Long Cheng Wuji glanced at Long Cheng Ting Shui. Gong Yimo also pushed Long Cheng Ting Shui to the front. This matter can also be discussed here, and her matter can also be resolved together. What is it? Forgive Long Cheng Wuji for being so engrossed in his thoughts right now that he had completely forgotten about his sister. Gong Yimo smiled faintly. She offended me. You haven't compensated me yet. Long Cheng Wuji suddenly felt that something was wrong. Gong Yimo smiled. The idea I told you just now was based on the mutual benefit of the 3 countries. But you, Luyi, still owe me an explanation. So, shouldn't you give me some benefits? She finally showed her claws and fangs at this time. Long Cheng Wuji immediately turned serious. If Gong Yimo demanded an exorbitant price, he would rather give up on this attractive deal than give the Daiyu State the chance to exploit him. Gong Yimo felt Long Cheng Wuji's body suddenly tense up, and could not help but soften her tone. Why are you so nervous? It's not that hard for you to do it. If he believed her, then he should be prepared to be eaten clean. This strange thought flashed through Long Cheng Wuji's mind. He asked cautiously, what do you want? Thinking of something, he smiled ambiguously. How do you want this prince to compensate you? Gong Yimo glanced at Long Cheng Ting Shui, as if she was estimating her value. It's actually very simple. Gong Yimo thought for a moment before saying, I'll take care of all the horse farms and relay stations on this road. Long Cheng Wuji was shocked. She was blatantly planting a spy. One had to know that there were occasionally foreigners who settled down between countries. But once they settled down, they had to change their household registration. And Gong Yimo actually meant that the people in the relay stations still belonged to Dayu State. How was that different from being a spy? Gong Yimo saw his stern expression and could not help but say it again. Don't be so nervous, she sighed and frowned slightly. Can't you open your mind a little? Why don't you think about it? Once the 4 countries are connected, those horse merchants will discover the business opportunity of transferring goods from the south to the north. If they want to expand, how could they not set up a fixed store? If Lu Yi came to Dayu State to set up a store to purchase silk, would our Dayu State force him to change his household registration? That's true, but if there are too many people like this, wouldn't there be the danger of a large number of assassins sneaking in? Long Cheng Wuji hit the nail on the head. Gong Yimo said, in the beginning, there will definitely be mutual supervision. Moreover, not everyone has the qualifications to set up a store in another country. The size of the store, the amount of money coming in and out, all of these need to be strictly controlled. Gong Yimo looked at him seriously. Once the 4 countries are connected, this is an inevitable trend. The various legal systems will definitely follow. And I'm only taking the first step. Don't tell me you want to cut off this possibility. Unless you don't want to establish diplomatic relations. Allow this prince to think about this carefully. He rubbed the space between his eyebrows and said in a low voice. Don't think about it. At most, you can just send people to keep an eye on it. Moreover, although these relay stations belong to me, other than the main person in charge, the workers will still be locals. What problems will there be? This is my only request. Won't you consider it? Gong Yimo struck while the iron was hot. She lowered her voice and discussed with him, as long as you agree, I promise that I won't say a word about your younger sister being violated by her uncle. Moreover, I'll even hand Chakran over to you. After all, this is your family's matter. Her words were full of meaning. Long Cheng Wuji thought about it carefully. What she said was true. Once the trade was connected, as time passed, there would definitely be foreign merchants stationed there. Gong Yimo could be the first. Anyway, he would keep an eye on it and see if it was feasible. Moreover, would he be afraid that he couldn't deal with a few Dayu State people in his territory? Moreover, Chakran had to come back. He represented that someone was eyeing his position. The most important thing now was to find out the mastermind behind the scenes. Therefore, he nodded in the end. Gong Yimo immediately beamed with joy. Then we can talk about other things in detail. This matter is settled just like that. Long Cheng Wuji looked at her helplessly. She actually discussed such an important matter with him at this kind of place, at the city gate. This was not a small matter. Once it was done, this ancient road would continue to be passed down and its name would be passed down through the ages. However, when he thought about it, out of the 18 relay stations, their Lu Yi would at most be given 7. Therefore, Gong Yimo could only open 7 relay stations in Lu Yi. But it was only 7. If she wanted to open them, she could open them. However, he would never have thought that the hotel chain that provided food, lodging, and transportation, the Holy Land for rich merchants, would take the first step after he nodded his head. This would create the glorious Golden Road in the future. How many people would see business opportunities here? How many people would rise on this road? The Golden Road would become a veritable road to wealth in the future. Chapter 333. Then, can you follow this prince into the palace now? Long Cheng Wuji smiled and gestured for her to enter. His gaze was fixed on her hand that was holding Long Cheng Ting Shui, indicating that she should let go. Gong Yimo rubbed her head and smiled. You can guarantee my safety, right? Long Cheng Wuji smiled but didn't say anything. He was the son of Eagle, not that puppet Emperor Yu Qi. Gong Yimo pointed at Long Cheng Ting Shui and said, what if she takes revenge on me? Long Cheng Ting Shui was furious. Gong Yimo, don't push your luck. Gong Yimo looked frightened and shrunk her neck. She looked timidly at Long Cheng Wuji, implying that his sister was so fierce, why didn't he give her a guarantee? Long Cheng Wuji looked majestically at his furious sister. When she became obedient, he promised, "In Lu Yi, you can come to this prince for anything that happens." Gong Yimo then let go of Longcheng Ting Shui. "Then it would be impolite for me to refuse." Once Longcheng Ting Shui was free, she didn't care about anything else and ran to the old Lu Yi king. Her tears flowed as if she had suffered a great grievance. The old Lu Yi king and the old princess consort hurriedly came down to welcome her. They hugged Longcheng Ting Shui and felt heartache. Her good daughter was not only rejected by the people of Dai Yu State who didn't know what was good for her, but also met with such an incident on the road. Her heart was aching to death. The worst thing was that her daughter was back, and the culprit was being protected by her own son, so she couldn't do anything. Thinking of this, she resented her son a little, feeling that he was siding with outsiders. Longcheng Ting Shui's head was resting on the old princess consort's body. Her eyes flashed with a fierce light, and she sobbed softly, "Mother, this person humiliated me. We can't let her live." The old princess was stunned. Looking at Gong Yimo and her son chatting happily, she could not help but feel a little troubled. From the looks of it, Gong Yimo seemed to have a good idea that could benefit Lu Yi. She could not possibly find trouble with Gong Yimo at this time, right? Gong Yimo was relieved after getting Longcheng Wuji's promise. She trusted Longcheng Wuji on this point. He was a man of his word and had a good reputation in the 4 countries in her previous life. In short, no matter how angry Longcheng Ting Shui and the others were, Gong Yimo still successfully entered the palace. Moreover, she was welcomed in with the etiquette of a distinguished guest. This almost made Longcheng Ting Shui grit her teeth. Seeing Gong Yimo lead her people away, Longcheng Ting Shui loudly said, "Mother, was he going to let her off just like that? Why don't you see what a vixen she is? In Dai Yu State, she didn't even let go of her own younger brother. Now, she's bewitching imperial brother." The old princess consort said awkwardly, "But your brother, mother." Longcheng Ting Shui unwillingly stomped her feet and looked at the old King Lu Yi. "Imperial brother usually listens to you the most. Father." She looked at the old King Lu Yi with teary eyes. The old King Lu Yi would definitely not interfere with his son's business. When they wanted to catch her at the beginning, they did not expect Gong Yimo to come with the idea of helping Lu Yi prosper. However, seeing his daughter so sad, he could not bear it. After all, Longcheng Ting Shui was his daughter that he got when he was 50 years old. Normally, she was more important than his eyes. "Ting Shui, don't worry." The white-haired old King Lu Yi looked in the direction that Gong Yimo and Longcheng Wuji left and said in a deep voice, "If there's a chance, I, your father, will definitely seek justice for you." Seeing that he was being perfunctory, Longcheng Ting Shui rolled her eyes and said while sobbing, "Big brother values her, because she can provide strategies. When she tells us the details, father, you must kill her." As she spoke, she added another dose of strong medicine. "You must know that she has a sharp weapon that even Dai Yu State's emperor covet. If she dies, it will be best for our Lu Yi. At most, we will become enemies with Dai Yu State. Do you think that I, Lu Yi, will be afraid of Dai Yu State?" It had to be said that Longcheng Ting Shui was smart. However, she used her intelligence to harm others. Every word she said to sow discord was on point. When the old King Lu Yi heard this, he felt that it made sense. After she told him the entire plan, he would kill her. Moreover, if Gong Yimo died, no one would be able to obtain the legendary sharp weapon on her. Then, even if Lu Yi offended the Dai Yu State, what was there to be afraid of? After all, Gong Yimo's threat level, in some cases, was even stronger than the Dai Yu State. At this moment, he was really thinking about this problem. Seeing this, Longcheng Ting Shui was happy in her heart. "Gong Yimo, you're dead meat. Lu Yi is not the Dai Yu State. I will let you die a splendid death." When Gong Yimo arrived at the Lu Yi Palace, Sikong and the rest went to rest. As for her, she was personally led to the residence by King Lu Yi. "We'll talk about the details tomorrow. I'm so tired today." When she saw the place, Gong Yimo said tiredly. She thought of something and her hand that was about to open the door paused. "You won't wake up tomorrow and find your head separated from your body, right?" She looked at King Lu Yi suspiciously. Longcheng Ting Wuji laughed. He realized that in front of Gong Yimo, He was always very easy to laugh. Don't worry and sleep. If you're still worried, why don't you come to my bedroom and sleep together? Gong Yimo shivered in disgust. Forget it. If I sleep with you, your sister will say that I'm the reincarnation of a fox charm and came here to seduce you. Isn't that the case? Long Chengting Wuji suddenly moved closer. His body had the smell of sunshine. Even in the winter, it gave people the feeling of the scorching sun. At this moment, his deep eyes were lowered. When his beautiful eyes were close, Gong Yimo even felt that the blue in his eyes was deeper than the sea. Although it was very beautiful, it was just admiring. She pushed Long Chengting Wuji. If you have something to say it properly. Don't come so close. Long Chengting Wuji blocked her at the door and said in an extremely domineering manner, You're seducing me. Did you forget the first time we met, how you treated me, Ien? The word Ien in his deep voice had a kind of bewitching feeling. Gong Yimo also laughed. What did I do to you? How come I don't remember? Right now, I want to go in and rest. Move aside. After saying that, she pushed the door open. But even though she moved quickly, Long Chengting Wuji was also fast. He forcefully squeezed into Gong Yimo's room and pushed Gong Yimo against the door with a backhand. This kind of teasing action made Gong Yimo's face turn cold. She calmed down and said dangerously, If I were you, I would definitely not do something like playing with fire. Long Chengting Wuji also laughed. Don't worry, I have no interest in a little bean sprout like you. Little bean sprout? Gong Yimo laughed. So it turns out that the person with such beautiful eyes is actually blind. Then what are you doing, forcing your sister's mother to misunderstand me? Do you think that I'm not dying fast enough? Long Chengting Wuji's muscular body once again pressed closer. He stared at her with a kind of domineering and overbearing pressure. This prince only wants to return the nameplate. Gong Yimo laughed and used her strength to push him away. Seeing him take a few steps back, Gong Yimo revealed a languid smile. Nameplate. Don't worry, I've already prepared to return it to you. But you'll have to wait until I go back. Long Chengting Wuji narrowed his eyes dangerously. Gong Yimo, don't be so ungrateful. This is Lu Yi. Gong Yimo laughed. What a coincidence, I'm famous for being ungrateful. After saying that, she spread out her hands and said with a kind of infuriating tone, What can you do to me? Chapter 334. Seeing Gong Yimo like this, Long Cheng Wuji gritted his teeth in anger, wishing he could give her a good beating. Gong Yimo, do you know that sometimes you are especially infuriating? She yawned. She was really sleepy. If you don't leave now, I will anger you to death. Do you believe it? Saying that, she pulled the door open. Hurry up and leave. With your name tag, my life in Lu Yi will be guaranteed. Don't worry, I will return it to you when I leave. I mean what I say. Long Cheng Wuji narrowed his eyes and said indifferently. So you already knew that this day would come, and purposely took away my name tag? Long Cheng Wuji seemed to have discovered something. You already wanted to come to Lu Yi? Gong Yimo's expression was calm, without a trace of embarrassment from being exposed. I don't know what you are talking about. If you don't leave now, I will shout that you are molesting me. Long Cheng Wuji took a few steps forward. The danger in his eyes seemed to have materialized. Gong Yimo. In Lu Yi, you better not play any tricks. And don't have any bad intentions, otherwise. What if it's a good thing? Gong Yimo suddenly raised her head and interrupted him. At such a close distance, he could clearly see that there was no evil in her eyes, only sincerity. Long Cheng Wuji was suddenly stunned. Gong Yimo deliberately wanted to do good things in Lu Yi? Don't tease him, she was a ruthless person who ate people without spitting out their bones, a little wild horse who wanted a yard after taking an inch. Gong Yimo smiled faintly. She really came with good intentions, but even if she said it, he wouldn't believe her. She was too lazy to say it, so she just asked. King Lu Yi, this little girl knows that you are ambitious, then can you tell this little girl, why are you so eager to do business with Yuheng? Speaking of this, Long Cheng Wuji's face showed some hesitation. Gong Yimo said it for him. Every winter is the hardest time, right? I walked from Lu Yi all the way to Hua Cheng. It's still okay under the emperor's foot, but the more bitter the place, the more people don't have enough to eat. so most of them stay at home and don't move, to reduce consumption. In many places, they only have one meal a day, and you want to change this situation, so you want to build an ancient horse road to buy food in Yuheng in winter, right? Longcheng Wuji suddenly took a step back, not daring to look at her. After all, she saw his family starving, and even said it was really embarrassing for him as the king. Gong Yimo's gaze. What's there to be embarrassed? Gong Yimo said indifferently. You actively take care of the people's livelihood. Unlike your brother, who wants to use war to plunder, you want to develop trade. From this, I can see that you are a good leader. Her direct praise actually made Longcheng Wuji's heart explode with joy for a moment. But he held it in, and still looked at Gong Yimo seriously, with a probing look, as if he was considering the truth of her words. Gong Yimo looked at him, striking while the iron was hot. She asked, if I can solve Lu Yi's food problem, how will you thank me? Longcheng Wuji laughed. How about giving yourself to me? He didn't take Gong Yimo's words to heart. If it was solved that way, his ancestors wouldn't have worked so hard to take over the Central Plains. The Central Plains was rich, but those weak people occupied the most fertile land in the mainland, to be able to eat their fill, wear warm clothes, and have ample food. Their Lu Yi also wanted these. Gong Yimo saw that he didn't believe her, but she wasn't angry. She just said, actually, I don't really agree with Lu Yi's ancestors' way of thinking. Do you think that as long as you take over the Central Plains, there will be endless food coming in? That's too naive. Longcheng Wuji smiled a little cruelly, looking at her with eyes sharper than an eagle's. Since we've already taken over the Central Plains, why can't we take the people of the Central Plains as slaves, and make them cultivate food? Gong Yimo didn't get angry when she heard him say that, and said slowly, give a man a fish, and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, and there's nothing more reliable than holding it in the palm of your hand. Sometimes, you can't even rely on yourself, and you still want to rely on others? Her words made Longcheng Wuji ponder deeply. What are you trying to say? He looked at Gong Yimo. Or, do you really have a way? When he asked this, he didn't believe it at all. Gong Yimo was a princess after all. Even if she was smarter than normal people and thought of all kinds of ways to build transportation, he didn't think that she knew much about the hardships of the people. But what he didn't know was that not only did Gong Yimo understand, but she also knew about the hardships of the people, and even created a hellish world single-handedly. The chances are 50-50. She thought of something, and said in a melancholy tone, I'm also not very confident. Let's see what price you can pay. Dai Yu State's princess always did what she said. Was she saying a trap, or was there really such a thing? Longcheng Wuji couldn't help but think deeply. This question is too important. This prince can't answer you now. Gong Yimo grinned. It's fine, it's almost the new year. I still want to spend it with you. The future is long. Then she pointed outside. There is a way, but if you don't let me rest now, I definitely won't be able to think of it. When the time comes, the one who will lose out will definitely not be the rich Dai Yu State. Longcheng Wuji had the urge to bite her again, grinding his teeth. Forget it. She must be tired from the long journey. Since that's the case, I won't ask her. Just like what she said, the future is long. After Longcheng Wuji left, Gong Yimo heaved a sigh of relief. This kind of person who was born with a strong aura, it was very stressful to communicate with. Of course, no matter what, she wasn't afraid. As for solving the food problem, Gong Yimo wasn't just talking about it, she really had a certain degree of confidence in doing so. But before doing so, she had to consider a problem. One was the domestic problem of Dai Yu State, and the other was the foreign problem. Let's not talk about the country first. Let's talk about Lu Yi. Lu Yi already had a strong army. If there was no shortage of food, would they settle down and live their own lives and work in peace and contentment? Or would they expand their ambition to conquer the Central Plains and conquer the world? She still had the military in her hands, so she wasn't afraid of Lu Yi going to war, but she didn't want to go to war. She wanted the four countries to be in a stable and self-sufficient state, just like the countries in the future. She didn't want to go to war. In the end, it all boiled down to the problem of the people's livelihood. The reason why people went to war was because of greed and their own lack of resources, just like Lu Yi. They lacked food, and the people didn't have enough to eat, so naturally, they would have evil thoughts. This was the root of evil. What if the people were rich? Everyone had enough food and clothing, and the country was self-sufficient. Who would be willing to leave their homeland to spy on others? On such a relatively stable basis, as long as there was a good lead, the countries would work hard to develop their own advantages and make up for their disadvantages, so that they wouldn't fall behind each other. Then, they would be able to form a win-win situation. When all the hard work would be rewarded, who would have the time to start a war? Did they think that their lives were too easy? Of course, it was still too early to say all these. Moreover, there was a limit, and timing was very important. Being too hasty would only backfire, so she had to think carefully and seize the opportunity. Therefore, she slept very soundly, all the way until the sun was high in the sky. Chapter 335. When she woke up, she washed up and someone brought her food. The servant girl knelt down in front of Gong Yimo and lowered her head. "My lady, it's time to eat." Gong Yimo smelled the food from afar and walked over in a daze. She picked up her chopsticks and prepared to eat. It seemed like King Lu Yi had specially instructed that the food was to follow the style of Dai Yu state. "Have the people I brought eaten?" Gong Yimo asked casually. The servant girl lowered her head and said, "They have their own courtyard and used the food they brought to cook. They've already eaten." Gong Yimo's hand paused and she couldn't help but sweat. The people trained by Gong Dai were much more vigilant than her. She felt around in her sleeves and took out a silver hairpin. The servant girl saw that she was going to use the hairpin to test for poison and didn't say anything. Gong Yimo tested it and the hairpin didn't change color. The servant girl heaved a sigh of relief and didn't say anything. Seeing that the servant girl was so nervous that she clutched her clothes tightly, Gong Yimo smiled and stood up. The servant girl panicked. "But you haven't eaten." "I'm not eating. I'll eat with your king in the future." She actually threw down her chopsticks and ran away. Lu Yi's palace wasn't big. The entire palace was built with huge yellow stones and was called the Golden Fort. Although it wasn't as graceful as a small bridge and flowing water, it wasn't as exquisite as a cornice, but it was rough and had a different kind of beauty. When Gong Yimo arrived, Long Cheng Wuji hadn't eaten yet. He was still reading documents and his eyes were dark. It seemed like he must have interrogated Chakran last night. After all, this was the most important thing. Lu Yi was a country made up of many tribes. There were 3 big clans and the change of kings was very common. So there had always been only King Lu Yi and no Emperor Lu Yi. In addition, Long Cheng Wuji had just taken the throne not long ago and the centralization of power wasn't stable. It was no wonder that he racked his brains every day and didn't smile. But it didn't matter. Gong Yimo believed that if he was given time to grow, Lu Yi would become an emperor sooner or later. Seeing that Gong Yimo was requesting an audience, King Lu Yi realized that it was already past mealtime. His waist was hurting a little. He had not rested for the entire night, so he was very dispirited. However, when he saw Gong Yimo, the dispiritedness on his face disappeared and was replaced with caution and shrewdness. He did not want to be taken advantage of by this little girl from Dai Yu State again. "What are you doing here?" Long Cheng Wuji kept a straight face, but in his heart, he was thinking that he would sleep after eating. What should he eat? Gong Yimo naturally didn't know what he was thinking. Looking at his dignified face, she didn't know why, but he was somewhat similar to Gong Cheng. She pursed her lips and smiled. "After thinking about it, I feel that it's not safe at my place. So I've decided that while I'm in Lu Yi, I want to freeload at your place, 2 meals a day." Long Cheng Wuji was a little stunned. He would usually go to his woman's place for dinner. Although he hadn't married Flower Boat Wuyo yet, he still had a lot of women. This way, he looked at Gong Yimo and pondered, was this little girl intentionally seducing him? If Gong Yimo knew what he was thinking, she would definitely vomit blood. In this palace, there were 3 people with high positions eyeing her covetously. She was only thinking about her own life, so she was willing to compromise. "Okay? I came here hungry. You haven't eaten yet, right?" Gong Yimo looked at Long Cheng Wuji with a pair of big eyes. He couldn't help but stare blankly, then a trace of a smile flashed through his eyes. "No, but, since you're here, this prince will bring you to try Lu Yi's specialty things." After saying that, he actually brought Gong Yimo out of the palace. The two of them urged their horses to gallop, with 2 guards following closely behind. Hua Cheng was the capital city newly built by Lu Yi. Because Lu Yi's king changed quickly, and Lu Yi was mostly nomadic, there weren't many people who settled down. The entire Hua Cheng wasn't big. Very quickly, they left the city and arrived at the boundless grassland. It was already the middle of the first month, which was the coldest time. So that kind of boundless greenery couldn't be seen, only desolation. Long Cheng Wuji stopped his horse. He also didn't know why he trusted Gong Yimo so much that he only brought 2 guards and brought her out. At this moment, he was sitting high on the horse's back, looking at the desolation. He said softly, "It's a pity that the time isn't right. In this place during summer, the tender grass is the most fertile. There are many people who will herd sheep, cows, and horses here." After saying that, a green ocean seemed to appear in his eyes. As far as the eye could see, the sky was blue and clear. The wind blew on his face, swimming in it, there was an indescribable profoundness. Gong Yimo also seemed to think of that kind of beautiful scenery, and said with a smile, "I think I will stay here until then, and then we will come out to horse race." "Okay, horse race." Not knowing why, Long Cheng Wuji suddenly felt a little uncomfortable in his heart, so he only agreed to horse race and didn't promise her to go back. Gong Yimo touched her stomach again. "After running for so long, I'm starving. You are bringing me out to drink the wind?" Her face was hurting from the wind. "We're almost there." Long Cheng Wuji glared at her, snorted and continued to lead the horse. Gong Yimo was helpless, thinking whether she should take some food from her space to eat. There seemed to be a piece of chocolate left. No. It would be gone if she ate it. Gong Yimo cried in her heart, because she liked to eat. There were a lot of delicious food in her space, most of them were snacks. But after so many years, although the ones she brought wouldn't spoil, there were only a few left. Finally, they arrived at a small tribe. The tribe was originally very quiet, but when they saw Long Cheng Wuji, everyone revealed a happy expression. Long Cheng Wuji looked at her with some pride. "This is the Cha tribe, there are many warriors in the tribe, this king often competed with them when I was young." When he said this, his eyebrows were slightly raised, looking very domineering. But Gong Yimo knew his bitterness. Lu Yi had 3 great bloodline aristocratic families, Long Cheng Wuji, Hua Ju, and Baiji. When he was young, the old Lu Yi didn't have any achievements, and the Baiji tribe took away his position as king, so even though Long Cheng Wuji had a noble status at that time, he still had to live a life of hiding. Later on, Baiji Lu Yi died an unnatural death, and the children of the Baiji family were weak and sickly. Many leaders then thought of Long Cheng Wuji's older brother, because although their family had fallen at that time, their bloodline was still noble. But his older brother was the kind of person who was muscular but simple-minded. He listened to other people's instigation and tried to kill his younger brother many times, so in the end, Long Cheng Wuji directly overthrew his older brother and succeeded. At this time, an old man came forward. He bowed to Long Cheng Wuji, his pair of old eyes looking at Gong Yimo with some puzzlement. Gong Yimo's appearance was also very good, but compared to them, there was still a big difference. Baiji Lu Yi waved his hand. "It's fine, this is my friend." Only then did they receive Gong Yimo warmly. Chapter 336. At noon, the whole tribe was very quiet. They were not rich. Only at night would they be a little more cheerful. There was no other way. The winter in Lu Yi was really long and hard to endure. But the arrival of King Lu Yi made the tribe livelier. Many young women came in to deliver food and stared at Long Cheng Wuji, not embarrassed at all. Old Cha prepared meat and wine to personally serve Long Cheng Wuji. Long Cheng Wuji was their tribe's benefactor, and they all welcomed him. The fragrance of wine and meat filled the main tent, but only old Cha accompanied Long Cheng Wuji to eat. Most of the people returned to their own tents after greeting them. It was not like summer now, and there was too little food. They couldn't afford to party with the entire tribe. Long Cheng Wuji felt a little uncomfortable. "Where are roads and weir?" Old Cha sighed. It hasn't snowed recently, so they wanted to see if there was any prey. "They haven't returned yet." What prey could there be at this time? There were only some wild beasts. Long Cheng Wuji fell silent, and the wine in his hand became tasteless. Old Xiaochea saw that he was in low spirits and smiled comfortingly. It's been 2 years. It was harder in the early years, but didn't you get through it? Long Cheng Wuji put down his wine cup. In front of old Xiaochea, he was as obedient as a child. I'm useless. The old man waved his hand. You can't say that. You are our tribe's benefactor, and you have done very well. Everyone remembers your kindness and believes that you can lead the Lu Yi people to glory. At this moment, he lowered his head slightly, feeling guilty. At this time, someone came in and whispered something in old Xiaochea's ear. It seemed that someone was sick. Old Xiaochea frowned and got up to leave. Because Long Cheng Wuji was familiar with him, there were not many restrictions between them. He waved his hand, and old Xiaochea left. Gong Yimo saw that he was in low spirits and asked with a smile, "Is this the delicious food you said you would treat me to?" Long Cheng Wuji came back to his senses and looked at the lamb in the middle. He felt a little conflicted, and thought to himself that he would compensate him when he left. The lamb roasted by old Cha's wife is the freshest. When I was young. He used the word I, and his expression was a little gloomy. When I was young, the thing I looked forward to the most in the winter was to be able to eat this during the holidays. Gong Yimo took a bite and sighed in her heart. She had to admit that it was delicious. There was a rank odor in the tent that could not be dispelled, but she did not know what she used to roast the lamb. It did not have any rank odor, and the meat was tender. It was a delicacy that you would never be able to eat. How is it? Seeing that Gong Yimo's eyes lit up, Long Cheng Wuji was a little proud. Is it Lu Yi's special delicacy? Without waiting for Gong Yimo's reply, he took a few bites himself. Suddenly, his expression became strange. It's a pity that you can't eat it often. Gong Yimo was also very clear that if it wasn't for Long Cheng Wuji's arrival, this kind of lamb would definitely not be killed. The value of raising it would be much higher than raising it now. You seem to be very familiar with this place. Gong Yimo asked curiously. Long Cheng Wuji didn't hide it from her. When I was young, I hid here for a few years. Old Cha doted on me a lot. As he spoke, his expression suddenly darkened. I was very close to old Cha's sons. Originally, it wasn't just Rode and Weir. He also had a younger son who was the same age as me. His name was Bai Jie. He suddenly frowned and said faintly, "But one year, the winter was very cold, and there was very little food. It was also a war, so I hid here with the entire tribe. During the process, I survived, but he starved to death. Before he died, he always said that he was hungry. I fed him blood, but he still died. It was unknown if it was because of the scene, but Long Cheng Wuji unexpectedly recalled such a past event. Behind him, the two attendants revealed an unbearable expression. At that time, when Lu Yi was in turmoil, such things were not uncommon. So from that time onwards, I swore that even in the cold winter, all the people in Lu Yi would be able to eat their fill and wear warm clothes, just like the people in other countries. They wouldn't have to suffer so much. Gong Yimo lowered her head to eat her meat and didn't reply. At this moment, Long Cheng Wuji seemed to have made up his mind. He looked at her seriously and said in a low voice, "Yesterday, you said you had a solution. I didn't believe you and I couldn't answer you. But now, I can make a promise." Gong Yimo looked up at him and saw that he was staring at her with a burning gaze. The heat and aura around him were like the sun. He was definitely not an ordinary person. Every word he said was loud. As long as you can solve this problem, solve the problem of Lu Yi's winter food shortage. As long as you don't ask me to betray my country and family, I will repay you in any way you want. Gong Yimo's eyes lit up and narrowed like a little fox. I can't promise you anything, but, if I can do it, can you really do it? If I go back on my word, I won't enter Eagle Deity Temple after I die. Good. Gong Yimo patted his shoulder with her oily hand. This is what I want. Come, let's eat. As she spoke, she tore a big piece of meat for him. Long Cheng Wuji was still feeling emotional. At this moment, he didn't really believe that Gong Yimo had a solution, but at least she had a solution. It was better than him not knowing what to do now. So the two of them ate the meat and drank the wine as if they were venting their anger. After eating and drinking to their fill, Longcheng Wuji felt that the distance between him and Gong Yimo seemed to have closed up. He asked in a low voice, "I'm curious. You helped me so much about the horse passage. Yes, you also helped Yuheng a lot. But what good did that do to you and Dai Yu State?" He didn't mention that Gong Yimo wanted to solve the food problem. After all, it hadn't happened yet. As a man, he didn't want to put pressure on a little girl. Gong Yimo had drunk some wine. Old Cha saw that they were chatting happily and didn't come in to disturb them. She became more impudent. At this moment, both her hands were oily and she was holding onto the meat as she spoke incoherently. "It doesn't do me any good." Longcheng Wuji was happy. Gong Yimo was such a shrewd person, but she was so selfless. He didn't believe it even if he said it out loud. People's thoughts change. She ate the meat, but her eyes were staring at the fire in the tent. "In the past, I thought that it would be good if I was rich. I had money and could do a lot of good things. Later, I realized that it was possible to do it alone, but the power was too small. So I instigated everyone to work hard and hope that Dai Yu State would be rich. Later, I understood what it meant to be the tallest tree in the forest. At that time, I thought that it would be good if everyone was rich. No one would have to worry about anyone else. Even the poorest people could use their own hands to live a good life. And now," she took a big bite of the meat and felt that she had found her ultimate goal in life. But she didn't say it out loud. Anyway, time would prove her thoughts. "You just need to know that I'm sincerely helping you, Lu Yi," Gong Yimo said in a low voice. "Sometimes, people have to be broad-minded and open-minded. Don't be afraid that others will surpass you if you help others. With tolerance and wisdom, many things can be a win-win situation." Unfortunately, Longcheng Wuji didn't fully understand what she said. When she said it later, he finally understood what she meant by a win-win situation. Chapter 337. That night, Longcheng Wuji's Divine Eagle Palace was in a heated argument. If it was a normal matter, it would have been fine. However, when Longcheng Tingshui woke up from her sleep and told Wang Luyi about Gong Yimo whipping her, Longcheng Duode was furious. He was already so old, yet he insisted on seeking justice from Gong Yimo. However, he was stopped by Longcheng Wuji. That was why they were arguing. "Wuji, that's your sister." The white-haired Duode slammed the table angrily. Beside him, the old Wang Fei was sobbing. Longcheng Wuji was having a headache from their argument. He had kept this matter a secret because he was afraid they would cause trouble. Gong Yimo was in the wrong, but he knew his sister's personality. She must have done something. Now, they were complaining about her. "Father, what do you want?" Longcheng Wuji was a little impatient. He did not have deep feelings for his parents, but he still respected them. However, that did not mean they could influence his decisions. Duode looked at his wife and said in a low voice, "This time, everyone who went to Dai Yu State must be killed." Longcheng Wuji was shocked. Ridiculous. Those people did not do anything wrong. Why should they pay for his sister's mistake? When Longcheng Wuji roared, the two elders did not dare to say anything. However, when he thought of his crying daughter, Duode braced himself and said, "Those people are useless." When Ting Shui was in Dai Yu State, they did not want to help her. Otherwise, why would she be sent back? They could not even keep an eye on a woman on the road. It caused Ting Shui to suffer such a thing. This last incident was even worse. Gong Yimo, a person from Dai Yu State, whipped our Lu Yi's princess in front of them. They actually stood by and watched. "Wuji, you still dare to use such a person?" His words made Longcheng Wuji feel uncomfortable. It was mainly because he was not there and did not know the truth. However, now that he heard it, he felt that Wuji did not do well. Duode struck while the iron was hot. His eyes flashed fiercely. Perhaps Wuji and the others have already been bribed by that woman called Gong Yimo. From what I see, she made it sound so dignified, saying that she wants to cooperate with Lu Yi. Who knows what she's selling in her gourd? It's winter now. She might be up to something by coming here. Long Cheng Wuji could not help but think of Gong Yimo's appearance when he was drinking with her in the afternoon. Her eyes were clear, without a hint of gloominess. Dod's eyes narrowed slightly, and his old face was tense. It was extremely frightening. He continued to add fuel to the fire. Limitless. Don't forget that when Hua Ju Wuyo came back, she said that she almost made it impossible for Gong Yimo to become a princess. Moreover, this time, Ting Shui almost made Gong Yimo lose her reputation. She's just a woman. How can she not resent her at all? How could they still prioritize the country? I'm afraid that even men can't be so free and easy. He clearly has ulterior motives. Enough. Long Cheng Wuji had not rested well in the first place, and his words made him even more annoyed. He did not want to suspect that Gong Yimo had ulterior motives, but in this position, when he heard such words, he had no choice but to put up his guard against her. After all, she was a citizen of Dai Yu State. This prince has said before that I will protect her in Lu Yi. Don't mention her matters again. Dod gritted his teeth, hating his son's stubbornness. Since you won't do anything to her, then Buji and the others should die. If they spout nonsense, Ting Shui's reputation will be tarnished. Who would be willing to marry a woman who was rejected by Dai Yu State and humiliated by her own uncle? Are you forcing her to her death? Then he said gloomily, or you can try to deal with them. If they didn't collude with Dai Yu State, Gong Yimo definitely wouldn't plead for them. If Gong Yimo really did plead for them, then there must be a conspiracy. At this moment, the old princess consort also started crying. Are you going to watch your sister suffer like this? Haven't you always doted on her? Although she was in pain, she had never been so troublesome in the past. Long Cheng Wuji gritted his teeth. None of them were easy to deal with. There's no need to talk about this anymore. This prince still has to go to Baiji's house tomorrow. Don't mention it again. With that, he sent the two of them away. He was not a muddle-headed person. Buji might have committed the crime of failing to protect his sister, but he did not deserve to die. Moreover, this was not the most important thing right now. Would his sister, King Lu Yi, still need to worry about marriage? But he never expected that the two of them would be so daring when he let his guard down. The next day, Gong Yimo was still asleep when someone shook her awake. She saw that it was a maidservant she had never met before. My lord. Not good. Father Wang wants to execute Sir Buji and the 1,000 attendants who came back from Dai Yu State. Gong Yimo was shocked. Where is your king? The maidservant cried out. The king went to Baiji's house early in the morning. Gong Yimo felt a headache coming on. Then why are you looking for me? This is your country's family matter. The maidservant was stunned. But Sir Buji told me to look for you. He said that you would definitely have a way to save him. He also said that if you save him, he will definitely listen to you in the future. He is a good person. Please save him. Gong Yimo's originally dazed mind suddenly flashed with a ray of light. You have found the wrong person. What does the death of 1 or 1,000 Lu Yi people have to do with me, a citizen of Dai Yu State? With that, she actually pulled her blanket and wanted to go back to sleep. My lord, the maidservant did not expect Gong Yimo to be so cold-hearted. She hesitated. Didn't she say that she took good care of Lu Yi and the rest? She even stood up for Lu Yi's maidservant. Why is she reacting like this? Finally, she gritted her teeth. My lord, please save him. This servant will go and beg other lords. If you change your mind, I will go to Heavenly Eagle Station. With that, she really left. Not long after, Sikong also came. When he arrived, Gong Yimo had already woken up. His expression was grave. Princess, I heard that the old Lu Yi king took advantage of the fact that Lu Yi went to the Baiji tribe to mobilize his private army to execute those Lu Yi people who came back from Dai Yu State. Gong Yimo frowned slightly. This matter has nothing to do with us. If you want to kill them, then kill them. Sikong sighed. Before this subordinate came here, His Highness gave this subordinate the right to contact Lu Yi's spies. They just sent news that the old Lu Yi king had made 2 plans. If you go, he will frame Buji for colluding with you. If you don't go, he will tell the world that it was your idea to execute those 1,000 people. Because you were humiliated in Dayu state when the stairway to heaven was broken, it was found that Buji colluded with the hidden sword sect. So this time, he used the excuse of cooperating with Lu Yi to force Lu Yi to kill them to give you an explanation. He also said that the hidden sword sect and Buji were warriors from the same sect. Therefore, Long Cheng's Ting Shui did not know anything about this. She was implicated when the engagement was broken. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.